Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Although the last Harry Potter film came out way back in 2011 and the books even earlier, millions of fans still live and breathe this magical world. They never tire of uncovering hidden meanings, arguing over details, and even catching J.K. Rowling in inconsistencies. Interestingly, she has answered many of these questions, personally and directly. Today, we'll explore such controversial moments and uncover the truth behind some of the wizarding world's lingering mysteries. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Did Neville Longbottom's parents ever recover? One of the most tragic moments in the series is the fate of Neville's parents. His mother and father, Frank and Alice Longbottom, both respected auras, were driven insane by the Cruciatus curse and ended up in St. Mungo's hospital. Fans held out hope. Maybe one day they would get better? Unfortunately, Rowling was unequivocal. I know people want them to recover, but dark magic caused wounds too deep. In some ways, what happened to them is even worse than what happened to Harry's parents. No hope at all. And that only makes Neville's story more powerful. Number 2, why didn't Dumbledore's portrait help Harry find the Horcruxes? If Dumbledore's portrait could speak and give advice, why didn't it simply tell Harry where to find the Horcruxes? That's a fair question asked by both readers and moviegoers. Rowling's answer is this: the portrait isn't the person's soul. It's just a magical projection, storing general knowledge, memories, and personality traits that existed at the time it was created. Everything Dumbledore wanted to keep secret, including Horcrux-related information, he deliberately withheld from his portrait. So the painting couldn't help Harry, simply because it didn't know. Number 3, did Petunia really hate Harry that much? Harry lived like a prisoner in the Dursley household, and no one annoyed fans more than his aunt, Petunia. But did she truly hate him? Rowling explained that Petunia had once dreamed of attending Hogwarts like her sister Lily, but was rejected. Later, she married Vernon, who despised magic, and began denying that world altogether. Harry became a painful reminder of both her sister and a dream that never came true, and yet she kept the blanket Harry was wrapped in when he was left on her doorstep. Deep down, perhaps, she still cared. But years of self-denial made her cold and harsh. Number 4, how much would it cost to attend Hogwarts? Fans did the math. If Hogwarts were real, factoring in robes, food, books, boarding, and magical gear, 1 year would cost about $43,000. Over 7 years, that's more than $300,000. But Rowling put those fears to rest. Education at Hogwarts is completely free or paid for by the Ministry of Magic. Parents are only responsible for buying textbooks, a wand, and uniforms. The rest is covered by the state. Now that's the British education system at its finest. Number 5, what does the Hufflepuff common room look like? Harry never once entered the Hufflepuff common room, and that means readers didn't get to see it either. So why didn't Rowling show us? She admitted she simply couldn't find a reason to send Harry there. But she did describe the room's look. The Hufflepuff common room resembles a cozy hobbit burrow. It's reached through a tunnel in the earth, opening into a circular room with low ceilings, honey-coloured wooden furniture, and countless plants, some brushing against students' hair as they pass. The colour palette is yellow and black, true to house tradition. Warm, calm, and welcoming, just like Hufflepuff itself. Number 6. Can an Animagus choose the animal they transform into? If they could, everyone would be a lion, a wolf, or a white stallion. But, fortunately or not, no, the choice isn't theirs. Animagus transformations are based on a wizard's inner self. The animal reflects their core essence. Take Peter Pettigrew. He became a rat, and that speaks volumes. James Potter, meanwhile, turned into a stag, just like his Patronus. The same goes for Minerva McGonagall. Both her Patronus and Animagus form are a cat. So Animagus transformation is not a costume, it's a mirror. Number 7. Why did Fred Weasley have to die? Fred Weasley died with a joke on his lips. 1 second he was laughing with Percy, the next, gone. A wall exploded. The world shattered. And George lost half of himself. Fans were furious. Why Fred? Why the twin who brought light into every dark room? Rowling later admitted it was one of the hardest decisions she made. "I cried while writing it," she said. But war, she reminded us, doesn't spare the kind or the funny. It breaks the unbreakable. That was the point. Fred's death wasn't random. He was the spark, the laughter, the one who made the readers feel safe, even when everything was falling apart. When he died, that safety vanished. It reminded everyone no one was untouchable, not even the Weasleys, not even Joy. Victory over Voldemort came with a cost, and Fred was that cost. A reminder that even in magic, war is cruel, and loss is real. Number 8. Why wasn't Hermione sorted into Ravenclaw? Hermione Granger was brilliant. Books, spells, logic, she mastered them all. Many thought she belonged in Ravenclaw, the house of intellect and wit. Even Professor McGonagall once said, "Miss Granger, you might have been in my own house." But the Sorting Hat made a different choice. It saw something deeper. Hermione valued bravery over cleverness, loyalty over pride. She didn't want to be the smartest. She wanted to stand with her friends. Rowling confirmed it. The Sorting Hat looks into the heart, not just the mind. Hermione could have gone to Ravenclaw, yes, but her courage burned brighter than her intellect. She ran into danger for those she loved. She punched Draco Malfoy in third year. She wiped her parents' memories to protect them. That wasn't logic. That was fierce, selfless bravery. And that's why she wore scarlet and gold, not blue and bronze. Number 9. What happened to Umbridge after Voldemort's defeat? Dolores Umbridge vanished from the pages after the final battle. No wand duel, no dramatic exit. Just silence. Fans asked again and again, what happened to her? How does someone so cruel, so deeply twisted, simply disappear? Rowling didn't leave it unanswered. Umbridge was arrested, tried, sentenced. Azkaban. She wasn't a Death Eater. She never took the mark. But she didn't need it. Her cruelty stood on its own. She tortured students at Hogwarts, branded Harry's hand with, "I must not tell lies." She sent innocent Muggleborns to trial with a smirk and a bow. In Deathly Hallows, Harry saw her again, wearing a locket that didn't belong to her, passing judgment as if the ministry was still hers. Muggleborn Registration Commission, her courtroom plaque read, a mask of law hiding her hate. Rowling confirmed the truth. Umbridge never changed. She felt no guilt, no regret, not even after Voldemort fell. She believed she was right until the end. That made her different from many villains in the story. Most had a motive, a loss, a choice. But Umbridge chose cruelty without fear, without pressure, without a master commanding her. And in Rowling's world, that's the darkest kind of evil, the kind that wears a pink cardigan and smiles while it destroys. Number 10. Why couldn't Harry see Thestrals before 5th year? Harry saw death before. He saw his parents fall. He watched Professor Quirrell die. But the Thestrals didn't appear, not yet. For years, the carriages at Hogwarts seemed to pull themselves. Empty, silent. The strange creatures remained invisible until his 5th year. That was when they came into view, black, skeletal and winged. They pulled him toward the castle, like shadows of something he could finally understand. Rowling explained it clearly. To see a Thestral witnessing death isn't enough. You must accept it, feel it, understand what it means. Harry was just a baby when Voldemort killed Lily and James. He had no memory, no grief. And when Quirrell died, it was chaos. Harry passed out. The moment blurred, the meaning didn't land, but Cedric Diggory, his death was different. It happened in front of him. It was sharp, sudden, real. "He's back," Harry whispered, shaking, as he clutched Cedric's lifeless body. That was the moment the veil lifted. Thestrals aren't monsters. They are reminders, carriers of truth. Luna Lovegood, who could also see them, explained it best. You're just as sane as I am. They are not a curse. They are a sign, a quiet message from the wizarding world. Grief changes you, and once you've known it, truly known it, the world never looks the same again. Number 11. Why was Voldemort incapable of love? Tom Riddle was born from a lie. His mother, Merope Gaunt, tricked his father with a love potion. Tom Riddle Sr. never loved her. When the spell broke, he fled. She died giving birth, alone, heartbroken, and weak. The child she left behind never knew a mother's touch or a father's voice. He came into the world not just unloved, but incapable of love. That's what J.K. Rowling revealed. Love was never planted in him, and nothing ever grew. Dumbledore knew the truth. "You are not the first to discover that magic is no guarantee for love," he told Harry in Half-Blood Prince. He wasn't just talking about Tom's powers, he meant his heart. Voldemort viewed love as weakness. He feared it, mocked it. But it was the one thing he could never conquer. He couldn't understand Lily's sacrifice. He couldn't grasp why Harry would walk into death without a fight. And that blindness cost him everything. He never had friends, only followers, never loyalty, only fear. Even Bellatrix, who adored him, received no warmth in return. When he hugged Draco in the forest, it felt wrong, cold, forced. The books never gave him a moment of tenderness, not even in private. That was deliberate. Rowling made him hollow, not because he chose evil, but because he was born without the one thing that makes us human. Voldemort's tragedy wasn't just his fall, it was that he never had anything real to lose. No family, no connection, no love. He tried to live forever by splitting his soul, but it only made him less alive. Harry, who had love in every scar, every tear, every goodbye, defeated him not with power, but with what Voldemort never understood. That love is not a spell, it's a choice. And Tom Riddle never had one. Number 12. Why didn't Harry die in the Forbidden Forest? Harry walked into the Forbidden Forest ready to die. He didn't run, he didn't fight, he clutched the resurrection stone and whispered the names of his parents, Sirius and Lupin. Then he dropped it. His heartbeat echoed louder than the sounds of the forest. Voldemort stood before him, raised his wand, and cast Avada Kedavra. Green light flashed. Harry fell. Silence. But he didn't die. He woke up in a white mist, a strange, dreamlike king's cross. Dumbledore was waiting. "You were the 7th Horcrux, Harry," he said gently. Voldemort had torn his soul so many times, he didn't even realize he left a piece in Harry. That's what the killing curse destroyed, not Harry's soul, but Voldemort's parasite. It screamed on the floor of that place, small and helpless. "Do not pity the dead, Harry," Dumbledore said. "Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." Rowling later explained why Harry lived. It was Lily's blood. When Voldemort used Harry's blood to return to life in Goblet of Fire, he tethered Harry to the world of the living. "He took into himself a tiny part of the enchantment," Rowling said. That blood ran through Voldemort's veins. As long as Voldemort lived, so did Harry. Ironically, the man who feared death more than anything accidentally anchored his enemy to life. Harry was never immortal. He made a choice. In that white place, Dumbledore gave him the option to move on, but Harry returned, not for himself, for others. The curse had killed only the Horcrux, not the boy, not the love, not the courage. That moment in the forest wasn't about magic, it was about sacrifice, and sacrifice in the world Rowling created is the oldest and strongest magic of all. Number 13. Why didn't Draco Malfoy become a Death Eater before 6th year? Draco Malfoy didn't become a Death Eater until his 6th year at Hogwarts. Fans found this strange. His father, Lucius Malfoy, had served Voldemort for years. The family was wealthy, pure-blooded, and proud. So why was Draco not marked earlier? J.K. Rowling gave a clear answer. Lucius had always tried to shield his son from the darkest parts of their world. He may have followed the Dark Lord, but he never wanted Draco to become a killer. That was a line even Lucius feared to cross. But Voldemort doesn't forget failure. After Lucius ruined the mission to retrieve the prophecy at the Department of Mysteries, Voldemort needed to punish him. Not with pain, but with fear. He gave Draco an impossible task: assassinate Albus Dumbledore. The Dark Lord is satisfied with the death of your son, Bellatrix Lestrange whispered in Half-Blood Prince, her voice cold. Everyone knew Draco wouldn't succeed. That was the point. Voldemort wasn't testing him. He was setting him up to die trying. Draco changed. He stopped being the arrogant boy who sneered in corridors. He grew pale, withdrawn. He avoided his friends, locked himself in the room of requirement, trying to fix a broken vanishing cabinet. That cabinet would become the back door for Death Eaters. But even as he worked, he trembled. Because deep down, Draco knew he wasn't a murderer. When the moment came, when he stood over Dumbledore with a wand in his shaking hand, he couldn't say the words. "Draco, Draco, you are not a killer," Dumbledore told him gently. And he wasn't. Snape cast the fatal spell, not Draco. That choice changed everything. Rowling later said this was the turning point for him. He wasn't innocent, but he was still human. He was born into darkness, but he didn't surrender to it. He was forced to carry a task meant for monsters, and he broke under the weight, but didn't shatter. Draco Malfoy walked away from murder. And in the wizarding world, that was an act of quiet rebellion. Number 14. Why did Snape become headmaster of Hogwarts? The appointment of Severus Snape as headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry remains one of the most controversial and emotionally charged developments in the entire Harry Potter saga. For many readers, it was a moment of betrayal. The greasy-haired potions master, so often a figure of disdain, had seemingly ascended to the highest position of authority within the castle just as the darkest hour fell upon the wizarding world. To the uninformed, it appeared to be the ultimate confirmation of his allegiance to Lord Voldemort. But as J.K. Rowling herself once clarified, the truth behind Snape's rise to headmaster was far more layered, more painful, and ultimately more heroic than anyone had guessed. Snape did not seek the position for power or recognition. In fact, he never wanted it. The order came directly from Albus Dumbledore, the only man Severus ever truly respected. This instruction was not made lightly. It was born from strategy, trust, and necessity. As the final pieces of the Wizarding War began shifting into place, the headmaster, already a dying man, was playing a game with fate, and Snape was his final knight. To hold Hogwarts was to protect its children. To do that, someone had to wear the wolf's skin and keep the true wolves at bay. When Snape became headmaster in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Hogwarts was no longer a safe haven. It had become an occupied territory. The Carrow siblings, Alecto and Amicus, were Voldemort's chosen enforcers within the school, bringing with them cruel punishments, twisted ideologies, and a reign of terror. Snape was placed between two infernos. To disobey the Dark Lord was to die, but to truly lead the school was to protect the young minds that still walked its halls. As Rowling once explained, Snape was never truly free to make his own decisions. Every move he made was under the scrutiny of the most dangerous man alive. Students were beaten, humiliated, and subjected to unforgivable curses. Yet under Snape's command there was still a line that could not be crossed. Amicus might throw the Cruciatus curse at a rebellious student, but the consequences rarely escalated into death or dismemberment. This wasn't compassion from the Carrows, it was restriction. Behind the scenes, Snape pulled strings, softened punishments, and redirected threats. He was the shadow protector, unloved and unsung. Few knew of it, and even fewer appreciated the burden. One of the most poignant examples came when Ginny Weasley, Neville Longbottom, and Luna Lovegood tried to steal the sword of Gryffindor from the headmaster's office. What they did not know was that the sword was a fake. Dumbledore had entrusted Snape with moving the real one to a location where Harry would later retrieve it. Snape arranged for it to be hidden within the frozen lake in the Forest of Dean, where Harry would eventually discover it, at great personal risk. The portrait of Dumbledore, still hanging in the office, offered the crucial link, allowing Snape to act in alignment with the plan long after his friend's death. "Do not use the sword. Do not remove it from that glass case," Snape barked at the Carrows, not out of anger, but out of need. He knew what it represented. The sword could destroy Horcruxes. Voldemort could never know that. In Rowling's own words, Severus was playing a role so dangerous that it bordered on the suicidal. This wasn't a role given to him casually, it was one only he could play, someone trusted by both sides yet truly belonging to neither. Behind the closed doors of the castle, Snape maintained a carefully constructed facade. He had to appear cruel. To show even a glimmer of warmth would be dangerous. It would invite suspicion. The students hated him. The teachers feared him. Even the Order of the Phoenix believed him to be lost. And yet, it was he who provided covert information to the resistance. It was Snape who sent the doe Patronus to guide Harry to the sword. It was Snape who stood between the students and the Carrows more times than they would ever know. Minerva McGonagall, ever the proud and noble witch, had long held suspicions about Snape, but even she could not see through the layers of deception. In the climactic moment of the Deathly Hallows, when she challenged him in the Great Hall, Snape deflected her attacks not toward her, but toward the Carrows. In those split seconds, the truth flashed by. He had never intended to harm her. His departure from the school was not retreat, but mercy. Some wondered why Dumbledore would entrust so much to someone with such a tarnished soul. But as the story unfolded, the answer became heartbreakingly clear. Snape had made an unbreakable promise, not just the magical kind to Narcissa Malfoy, but a moral vow to protect Harry Potter. Not for the boy's sake, but for Lily Evans, the only woman Severus Snape ever loved. That love, however twisted and tormented, was the core of his redemption. Everything he did was for her memory, even if it meant becoming a villain in everyone else's story. "Look at me," those were Snape's final words. Not to Voldemort, not to the war, but to Harry. Because, in his last breath, he wanted to see Lily's eyes one more time. It is a detail Rowling emphasized with painful clarity. Severus died as he lived, alone, misunderstood, yet burning with silent devotion. After the war, the truth was revealed. Harry himself would go on to defend Snape's name. He called him the bravest man I ever knew. He named his second son Albus Severus Potter. For a man who had once been considered a traitor and a coward, it was a posthumous absolution. But that recognition came too late for Snape to feel it. He never wanted glory, he never received love, but he fulfilled his task to the end. Number 15. Why didn't Hermione restore her parents' memories right after the war? Of all the acts of bravery seen during the Second Wizarding War, one of the quietest, and perhaps most tragic, belonged to Hermione Granger. While her friends were preparing for battle, Hermione performed a spell that would erase her from the memories of her parents. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, this act is only briefly mentioned, almost as a footnote in the whirlwind of events leading up to the Horcrux hunt. But to understand the depth of this decision, and why it took so long for Hermione to reverse it, one must look beyond the pages of the novel and into the careful commentary provided by J.K. Rowling herself. At the beginning of their final year, Hermione confesses to Harry and Ron that she modified her parents' memories, giving them new names and a new life in Australia. "I've also modified my parents' memories so that they're convinced they're really called Wendell and Monica Wilkins, and that their life's ambition is to move to Australia," she says in Deathly Hallows. The simplicity of the description masks a deeply complex magical feat. Memory charms are notoriously dangerous, and even a skilled wizard like Gilderoy Lockhart managed to do irreversible damage to himself with one miscast spell. For Hermione, the risk wasn't theoretical. The lives, minds, and very identities of her parents were at stake. When the war ended and Voldemort was defeated, readers naturally assumed that Hermione would rush to find her parents and undo the spell. Yet time passed, and the reunion didn't happen immediately. This delay became the subject of fan theories and debates, some even suggesting emotional estrangement or magical complications. But Rowling would later offer an explanation, one that speaks to the essence of Hermione's character: caution, responsibility, and unwavering respect for the minds of others. Rowling explained in a 2011 fan Q&A that Hermione took time to properly study the implications of reversing such a powerful spell. This wasn't just a question of snapping her fingers and having her parents recognize her. As Rowling put it would have been reckless, even dangerous, for her to attempt it without knowing exactly what she was doing. A botched reversal could have left them mentally damaged or emotionally unstable, and Hermione Granger, for all her courage, was never reckless with knowledge. There's something profoundly human in this hesitation. Hermione wasn't saving the world anymore. There was no immediate deadline, no Horcrux to destroy, no friends in mortal peril. What she had was silence, time, and the crushing weight of responsibility. For the first time, she had the luxury, or the burden, of being able to pause and think, to plan carefully. And she did what she always did. She opened books, studied theories, consulted magical texts on memory manipulation, and sought help from trusted magical experts. She approached the reversal not as a daughter in desperate need, but as a scholar with a sacred mission. One of the texts Rowling referenced through Hermione's research was The Mind's Mirror, Magical Memory and the Self, a fictional book mentioned briefly in Pottermore lore. This tome discussed how memory spells aren't just about thoughts, but about the very architecture of the self. Undoing them requires not just the reversal of magic, but the careful restoration of the emotional connections tied to those memories. In essence, if done incorrectly, Hermione's parents might have remembered her name, but not the love that came with it. Hermione's parents, by all accounts, were kind, rational people. Mr. and Mrs. Granger, two dentists living in the Muggle world, had accepted their daughter's magical life with open minds. But for Hermione, it wasn't enough to simply give them back their memories. She needed to ensure that the reintegration of those memories wouldn't feel like a psychic attack. Imagine waking up one morning to realize that your entire life, your name, your home, your marriage, your child, was a carefully constructed illusion. Even if the truth is better, the shock can break the mind. To put it in perspective, think of what happened to Bertha Jorkins, a minor character mentioned in the Goblet of Fire. After a memory charm was improperly lifted from her, she became disoriented and vulnerable, a condition that Voldemort exploited. Rowling herself referred to that example in interviews, stating that memory charms are invasive. They alter a person's very reality. Undoing them improperly is like trying to reattach a severed limb without knowing where the veins go. In addition to the magical complexity, there was emotional fear. Hermione had just lived through a war. She had seen Fred Weasley die, watched Snape's final moments, carried a piece of Voldemort's soul in her backpack without knowing it. Her own sense of identity had been shaken. There's reason to believe she feared what her parents might think of her actions. Even if they eventually remembered their love for her, would they forgive her for wiping their minds without consent? This question haunted Hermione, and Rowling confirms it. She questioned herself a lot after the war. She had done what she had to do, but that didn't make it easier, Rowling wrote. There was guilt, even though it had been done out of love. And perhaps that guilt made her move slower. Hermione wasn't just trying to fix magic. She was trying to prepare herself for a deeply human confrontation. Rowling adds that Hermione finally travelled to Australia almost a year after the Battle of Hogwarts. By then, she had completed several courses in advanced memory restoration and had worked closely with specialists at St Mungo's Hospital. The Grangers were living quietly in a suburb outside Sydney, still convinced they were the Wilkins family. Hermione approached them not with a wand drawn, but with a plan, and with patience. The actual reunion, according to Rowling, was not without its complications. At first, her parents were frightened, unable to reconcile the sudden images that began flooding their minds. Hermione spent days with them, using a blend of magic and emotional support, gently restoring their memories piece by piece. It wasn't a moment of triumphant reunion, but a slow, delicate unfolding, the kind of magic that's rarely shown in duels or battle scenes, but which may be more profound than any spell. Number 16. Why didn't Voldemort try other ways to achieve immortality? There is a question that has long lingered in the minds of readers who dared to step beyond the pages of the Harry Potter series and examine the deeper, darker corners of its villain's soul? It's a question that peels back the surface of Tom Riddle's monstrous ambition and reveals something even more chilling than his thirst for power. Why, many have asked, didn't Lord Voldemort pursue immortality through means less grotesque than Horcruxes? Why not seek the Philosopher's Stone, a proven and far more elegant key to eternal life? It is a query so persistent that even J.K. Rowling herself took the time to answer it. And the answer she gave only deepens the tragedy of the man who became a monster. To understand Voldemort's obsession with the Horcrux, one must first understand his soul, or more accurately, his belief that the soul was merely a vessel, not a sanctity. Unlike Nicholas Flamel, the creator of the Philosopher's Stone, who viewed immortality as a side effect of alchemical mastery and not the ultimate goal, Tom Riddle saw life as a game of survival, a struggle against mortality that could only be won through domination, not harmony. To him, death was not simply an end, it was a defeat, and Voldemort was not a man who accepted defeat. From the moment he learned he was a wizard, young Tom showed contempt for anything that signaled dependence. He hated the orphanage because he was subject to its rules. He resented his peers at Hogwarts because he considered them intellectually inferior. He despised his Muggle father for the weakness of love and his mother for dying in childbirth. The idea that he might rely on a magical object created by another man, Nicholas Flamel, was anathema to everything he stood for. The stone, for all its mystery and power, was not his. Therefore, it was unworthy of his trust. Rowling explained this clearly when addressing the fans' confusion. Voldemort, she said, was too proud to rely on anything he did not create himself. His pursuit of immortality was not about merely avoiding death, it was about controlling it. The Philosopher's Stone would have granted him life, yes, but on borrowed terms. It would tie his existence to the work of another. For a man like Voldemort, that was no better than servitude. He wanted a kind of immortality that made him the master of death, not a mere guest in someone else's creation. This pride was not only his weakness, but the root of his cruelty. Horcruxes, for all their dark infamy, were Voldemort's own invention, or so he believed. While the magic was ancient and known only to a few, it was he who refined the process, multiplied it, twisted it into something more radical than any other dark wizard had dared. "Lord Voldemort has 7, said Slughorn in hushed horror, recalling the conversation that had been extracted from his memory. 7? Isn't 7 the most powerfully magical number? Tom Riddle had asked. Not because he sought balance or beauty, but because he sought to fracture his soul into as many pieces as possible, just to outrun death. It was, in the end, a rebellion against nature itself. Whereas the Philosopher's Stone worked within the boundaries of magical law, the Horcrux violated it. And that violation thrilled Voldemort. It gave him a godlike sense of supremacy. Not even death, the greatest equalizer, could touch him. Not as long as his soul lay scattered across enchanted objects like a ghost spread thin. "Ah! Nothing is worse than death, Dumbledore," Voldemort shouted in their final battle. But Dumbledore's reply cut to the truth. "You are quite wrong." That was perhaps the greatest tragedy of Voldemort, his inability to understand that life has meaning precisely because it ends, to seek immortality through love, through legacy, even through magical artifacts like the Philosopher's Stone, requires some acceptance of life's limits. But Tom Riddle was not interested in limits. He was interested in control. And so he chose a path soaked in murder and pain, because only that path allowed him to feel truly invincible. Quirinus Quirrell's attempt to use the stone in the Philosopher's Stone is telling. Quirrell, weak and trembling, allowed Voldemort to possess his body in a desperate bid to recover the stone and restore his master's life. But Voldemort, even then, was not content to wait for the alchemical process. He urged Quirrell to kill Harry Potter, to seize the stone, to act with violence and dominance. He could not bear the idea of healing slowly. He wanted immediate power. The Philosopher's Stone was for him a crutch, and he despised crutches. Nicholas Flamel, by contrast, lived in peace for centuries. He and his wife, Perenelle, used the elixir of life not as a weapon, but as a blessing. When they finally agreed to destroy the stone to keep it out of Voldemort's reach, they accepted death with dignity. "To one as young as you, I'm sure it seems incredible," Dumbledore told Harry. "But to Nicholas and Perenelle, it really is like going to bed after a very, very long day." It is a quiet line, but one that underscores the enormous chasm between Flamel's wisdom and Voldemort's madness. Indeed, Voldemort feared more than death. He feared irrelevance. The stone, though powerful, would never make his name immortal. But the Horcruxes, those desecrated pieces of his soul, would ensure that he lingered in the minds of others like a curse that refused to fade. Even in exile, even as a bodiless wraith, he was still spoken of in fear. "He who must not be named," they whispered. Voldemort didn't just want to live forever, he wanted to haunt forever. There is also a deeper psychological current beneath his choice. Horcruxes, unlike the Philosopher's Stone, demanded murder. They required death as the price for cheating death, and for Voldemort this was a perfect equation. The more he killed, the more he proved that he was stronger than those he killed. In every victim he saw a weakness he had purged from himself. The stone, by contrast, required no blood. It did not demand the soul as payment, and therefore to Voldemort it seemed almost cowardly. Number 17, why didn't the Horcrux inside Harry sense the others? It was a question that lingered in the air like mist over the Forbidden Forest, quiet, persistent, and impossible to ignore. For years, Harry Potter fans debated it in whispers and essays, on forums, and in fan clubs. If Harry himself unknowingly carried a piece of Voldemort's soul, why didn't he feel anything when he came into contact with the other Horcruxes? Shouldn't there have been a tremor, a resonance, a flicker of connection, some ghostly magnetism between those splinters of the Dark Lord's soul? The answer came from the only source that could truly settle such a matter, J.K. Rowling herself. In an interview that sent shockwaves through the wizarding world, she unveiled the truth behind this strange silence. The soul fragment in Harry, she explained, was not like the others. It had no consciousness, no awareness, no perception of its counterparts. It was not even dormant. It was inert, like ash drifting through wind, present but lifeless. To understand this, one must remember the nature of Horcruxes as described by Dumbledore himself. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the Headmaster explains to Harry that a Horcrux is created through an act of murder when the soul is torn and part of it is encased into an object to preserve a form of immortality. "It is the supreme act of evil," Dumbledore had said, "to split the soul." But what happened when Voldemort's killing curse backfired on the infant Harry? Something went wrong, something unplanned. A fragment of soul clung to the only living thing in the room. This fragment, unlike the 6 intentional Horcruxes Voldemort had crafted, was created out of chaos and destruction. It wasn't forged through deliberate magic. It wasn't encased in a relic, nor protected by enchantments. It simply attached itself to Harry, an infant too young to understand or resist. As Rowling described, it was a scrap of soul so damaged and disconnected that it lacked even the most basic awareness of its identity. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Harry begins to sense something unusual, visions, feelings, flashes of rage that were not his own. When he watches Arthur Weasley attacked by Nagini, he sees it not as an observer but as the snake. Later, he experiences Voldemort's fury when the locket Horcrux is stolen. These moments suggested a link, but not one of attraction between Horcruxes. Instead, they signaled a connection between Harry and Voldemort himself. The scar was the channel, the conduit of residual magic that pulsed between them. The scar had not pained Harry for 19 years. All was well, Rowling wrote in the book's epilogue. This small sentence carried a world of meaning. The scar had been the symbol of connection, not between Horcruxes, but between Harry and the Dark Lord. And when Voldemort unknowingly destroyed the soul fragment inside Harry during the Battle of Hogwarts, that connection vanished. The other Horcruxes never spoke to Harry's Horcrux because it lacked the will or power to speak. Consider the locket, Slytherin's locket, worn by Dolores Umbridge, hidden in the cave, and finally destroyed by Ron Weasley with the sword of Gryffindor. When Harry wore the locket, he felt its influence, yes, but it was a poisonous psychological pressure, not a mutual recognition. The locket whispered doubts and fears, but it did not sense the soul within him. Nor did the diary of Tom Riddle, long since destroyed in the Chamber of Secrets, react to Harry's presence any differently. In fact, if any Horcrux might have felt something familiar, it would have been the diary. Yet in the Chamber of Secrets, Riddle's memory treated Harry as an enemy and rival, not a kindred soul. When Harry retrieved Hufflepuff's cup from Bellatrix's vault at Gringotts, he didn't feel any magnetic pull. No chill up the spine, no burning scar. The cup remained silent, cold, unaware. And when Hermione destroyed it with a basilisk fang, there was no sign of a soul fragment within Harry being disturbed by the destruction of its sibling. It was as if they were strangers passing in the night, blind to each other's existence. Why? Because, Rowling clarified, the fragment inside Harry was not sentient. Unlike the piece of soul in the diary which could converse, manipulate and charm, the part in Harry had no consciousness of itself. It was like a cancerous cell lodged deep within his being, dangerous but unthinking. It could not scream when its kin was slain. It could not mourn. It could not reach out across the void. It merely existed, and Harry carried it in ignorance for 17 long years. Rowling once compared the soul to a pane of glass. When it is intact, it reflects light and shows clarity. But when it is shattered, when it is deliberately broken through acts of murder, it becomes jagged and chaotic. Voldemort shattered his soul so completely that parts of it began to lose coherence. The soul fragment in Harry was like a sliver embedded in flesh, causing pain but lacking identity. It wasn't aware that it was part of something larger. It simply festered. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry walks willingly into the Forbidden Forest to die, it is not just his courage that strikes us, it is his trust. He walks toward death knowing that part of him must perish. When he meets Dumbledore at King's Cross, the old man shows him what remains of that fragment. "Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love," Dumbledore says. Nearby, a small, flayed creature lies, whimpering beneath a bench. This was the piece of Voldemort's soul that had lived inside Harry, finally torn free by the killing curse. Rowling confirmed that this pitiful creature was not a separate being. It was the residue of Voldemort's twisted soul, unable to exist without a host. It had no voice, no will, no memory. It was never meant to exist. It was horror without awareness. It had no idea what it was, Rowling said, and it had no ability to communicate or perceive the other fragments. This concept reshapes how we view Horcruxes. They are not a network. They are not a hive mind. Each one is a prison cell, trapping a prisoner who doesn't know the others are still alive. The soul, once fractured, becomes isolated. Only Voldemort himself retained the knowledge of his Horcruxes, and even he was blind to the one he accidentally created in Harry. It was the ultimate irony that the key to his downfall lived inside the boy he sought to kill. Even Nagini, the final Horcrux before Harry, never displayed awareness of the fragment in Harry. She attacked him with the same savage loyalty she showed to Voldemort. When Neville Longbottom killed her with the sword of Gryffindor, it was a decisive blow, but again, there was no response from within Harry. No sense of loss, no tremor in the soul. The fragment inside him was as silent as ever, waiting for death to set it free. Some fans believed that perhaps the Horcruxes should have reacted to each other, sensing their proximity like enchanted artifacts. But Rowling emphasized that magical objects only interact when designed to do so. The Horcruxes were hidden, protected, scattered. They were not made to communicate. Voldemort didn't want them to. Each was meant to operate independently, to serve as a safeguard against mortality, not as a family of cursed siblings. Moreover, Harry never knew he carried a Horcrux. He never looked for signs because he didn't know they existed. He never recognized the unease in his heart as coming from something foreign. He blamed the scar, he blamed the dreams. Only in the final moments, when Snape's memories revealed the truth, did he understand what he had been all along: a vessel, not a partner, not a host, a vessel for something ancient and broken. This truth was terrifying but also liberating. Harry had never been evil, he had never been compromised. The soul fragment did not whisper temptation in his ear, it did not poison his will. Unlike the locket that made Ron paranoid or the diary that ensnared Ginny, the fragment in Harry was passive. Rowling wanted readers to know that good can exist even when touched by evil, that a person is not defined by what is inside them, but by the choices they make. When Harry finally faced Voldemort, he was whole in a way the Dark Lord could never be. Voldemort had severed his soul so many times that he had become less than human. Harry, despite being unknowingly tethered to evil, had kept his heart. He had loved, sacrificed, forgiven. The soul fragment within him had never touched his essence. It had only waited. In the end, that was why the Horcruxes never recognized each other, because they were not truly parts of a soul anymore. They were echoes, they were wounds, they were remnants of a man who feared death so greatly that he tore himself to shreds to escape it. And in that desperation, he overlooked the one thing that would destroy him. A boy carrying not just a piece of his soul, but the love, courage, and mercy he had long since abandoned. And so the answer to the great question is as haunting as it is beautiful. The Horcrux in Harry never felt the others because it was never truly alive. It was never meant to feel. It was never meant to be. It simply existed until Harry set it free. Number 18. Why is Ginny barely in the spotlight? In the sprawling world of Harry Potter, where even fleeting characters are often layered with depth and history, one name has sparked more debates than many others. Ginny Weasley, the youngest child in the Weasley family, sister to Ron, and eventually Harry Potter's wife, Ginny's presence feels curiously subtle through much of the series. For a character who becomes central to Harry's life, her early narrative feels almost muted. Fans have questioned this for years. Why does Ginny, with all her potential, seem to hover at the margins for so long? And to this, J.K. Rowling eventually offered a deeply personal answer, one that reflects both narrative intention and emotional realism. From the first time readers meet Ginny in the Philosopher's Stone, she is simply Ron's little sister, a shy girl with flaming red hair and wide eyes who can barely speak in Harry's presence. She doesn't attend Hogwarts in the first book and is mentioned only in passing. But in the Chamber of Secrets, Ginny finally steps into the spotlight, though not in the way one might expect for a future heroine. Instead of shining in heroics or cleverness, she becomes the helpless victim of Tom Riddle's diary, a vessel through which Lord Voldemort returns to nearly kill again. It is an unusual beginning for a female character destined to stand beside the Chosen One. Rowling later explained that this was deliberate. Ginny's growth, unlike Hermione's blazing intellect or Ron's emotional arc, would be subtle. "I didn't want her to be the perfect girl," Rowling said in a post-publication interview. "She had to earn her space in the narrative. Ginny was never meant to burst onto the scene with charisma or dramatic talent. She was meant to grow, to stumble, and then to rise with quiet resilience. Her story is not one of spectacle, but of steady evolution." This choice, however, made her early presence feel almost invisible to many readers, and yet the clues were there. In the Chamber of Secrets, Ginny shows both innocence and inner turmoil. Possessed by Riddle's diary, she writes heartfelt confessions, desperate fears, and secrets she can't share with her family. She is terrified, not only of what's happening around her, but of what's happening inside her. "I've been writing in the diary for months," she tells Harry in the final chamber, shaking with fear, "and now I can't stop." That confession, though brief, reveals a character who is sensitive, intelligent, and deeply affected by emotional manipulation. It's a moment that many missed, but Rowling didn't. When Ginny returns in The Prisoner of Azkaban, she is again sidelined. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are immersed in the mystery of Sirius Black, and Ginny's development happens off-stage. But Rowling was seeding her evolution. In later reflections, she noted that Ginny's trauma from the diary incident was significant. She needed time to heal. She needed space to become something more than the frightened girl lying in the chamber. And so her transformation continued quietly beyond the page. By the time of The Order of the Phoenix, the Ginny readers meet is not the same girl from earlier books. She is bolder, quicker with a comeback, and she's joined Dumbledore's army. When Harry is consumed with visions and rage, Ginny stands firm. It is she, not Hermione or Ron, who reminds Harry that he isn't alone in his trauma. "You're not the only one who's suffered," she says sharply, referring to her own experience with Voldemort. That line, brief but powerful, is Rowling's declaration. Ginny is no longer a background character. Still, many readers found her development too quiet. Her growth occurred often in the gaps between the central narrative, between chapters focused on Horcruxes, battles, or Harry's angst. But Rowling believed this made her more real. "Not every strong person walks into a room and dominates it," she said in a rare online exchange. "Some grow into themselves with time, and Ginny's one of them." The books, she admitted, didn't always allow enough room to show that journey, but she felt it was there, for those who looked. A powerful moment of this understated strength comes in Half-Blood Prince, when Ginny breaks up with Dean Thomas. It's not dramatic, it's quiet, decided. Ginny, who once blushed furiously in Harry's presence, now moves with confidence. She's a talented Quidditch player, a brave fighter, and someone unafraid to tell Harry when he's being unreasonable. "I'm not going to be one of those girls who sits around waiting," she tells him during their brief romance. This isn't the Ginny of Book 2. This is someone who's endured darkness and come out stronger. Her relationship with Harry, too, grows not from fiery passion, but mutual respect. Rowling later clarified that this was intentional. "Harry didn't fall in love with Ginny because she dazzled him," she said. "He fell in love with who she became, a person who understood him, who challenged him, and who never asked him to be anything but himself." That kind of love, she noted, is not born in a single moment. It's earned over time. And Ginny, whose life was once controlled by a diary, earns her autonomy page by page. This nuance, however, didn't translate well to the films. Ginny's presence in the movies was notably flatter, with many of her important lines and actions either minimized or cut entirely. Book, Ginny hexes boys, scores goals, and stands tall during the final battles. Film Ginny ties Harry's shoelaces. This disconnect frustrated readers who saw her growth as one of the series' most quietly inspiring arcs. The films made her forgettable, Rowling admitted in a post-film Q&A, but she was never meant to be that. One must consider Ginny's role during the Battle of Hogwarts. She fights bravely against her mother's orders and stands among the fallen. She is there when Fred dies, there when Voldemort falls. But again, her heroism is unspoken. She doesn't seek the limelight. In the Deathly Hallows, she is one of the last defenders of Hogwarts, standing shoulder to shoulder with older students refusing to leave. That courage, Rowling said, was born in the chamber when she realized that the only way to beat fear is to walk through it. After the war, Ginny becomes a professional Quidditch player and later a journalist for the Daily Prophet's sports section. These details, briefly mentioned in The Cursed Child and supplemental writings, underscore Rowling's vision of her. A woman who follows her own path, not defined by Harry, but choosing him all the same. Ginny's post-war life is not about becoming Mrs. Potter. It's about becoming Ginny Weasley on her own terms. Rowling's confession that Ginny's arc was intentionally quiet is one of the rare instances where an author admits the limitations of their own spotlight. "I wanted her to feel real," she said. "Not everything needs to shout to be strong." For Rowling, Ginny's transformation from a timid child to a confident young woman mirrors the journey many girls face, learning to find their voice, their courage, and their identity. Readers looking for more of Ginny need only reread The Order of the Phoenix with fresh eyes. Her participation in the battle at the Department of Mysteries, her wand work, her defiance, all signal a character whose strength lies in action, not words. "Reducto!" she cries, blasting Death Eaters with raw force. She doesn't need a prophecy to guide her, she's already chosen her side. Even Fred and George, never easily impressed, show pride in Ginny's feisty nature. "Our little sister," they exclaim after she breaks into the Ministry with Dumbledore's army. It's a rare sibling validation that reflects her evolution, not just in the eyes of readers, but within her own family. Ginny is no longer just the baby of the Weasleys, she's a warrior. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Ginny's journey is how it contrasts with the traditional hero's love interest trope. She doesn't exist to support Harry, she exists beside him. When he chooses to leave in Deathly Hallows, Ginny doesn't beg him to stay, she kisses him and lets him go. That quiet, confident trust is the result of a girl who once lost herself to another's voice, but now owns her own. When Harry names his daughter Lily Luna, readers often focus on the homage to his mother and Luna Lovegood. But it's also a quiet nod to Ginny's influence, her courage, her loyalty, her steady presence. Luna, Ginny's close friend, and Lily, the mother Harry never knew, both reside in the name of their daughter, a symbol of memory and strength. It's a tribute to the women who shaped him, but also to the woman who stood with him. In fan circles, Ginny's arc continues to be re-examined. Many now recognize the brilliance of a character whose power was never in prophecy or popularity, but in persistence. Ginny teaches readers that survival isn't always loud, and that healing doesn't always happen in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in returning to play Quidditch after trauma. Sometimes it's in standing up to a brother. Sometimes it's in saying goodbye without breaking. For Rowling, Ginny was a character who reflected the quiet strength she herself admired. She was the girl who grew into her power, the author said, and I think that's just as magical as anything in the books. Indeed, Ginny's story is not about what she does for Harry, but what she becomes for herself. And in that perhaps lies her greatest magic. Number 19, why did Percy Weasley return to his family? Percy Ignatius Weasley had always walked a different path from his family. While the rest of the Weasleys wore their eccentricities with pride, Fred and George with their pranks, Ron with his loyalty, Bill with his dragon scars, and Charlie with his flame-singed spirit, Percy chased structure, discipline, and validation from authority. It wasn't a thirst for power that led Percy to the Ministry. It was the belief that institutions mattered, that rules brought order, and that loyalty to the system was the noblest of virtues. But in a world at war, the lines between loyalty and betrayal blurred quickly, and Percy, in his stubborn righteousness, lost his way. Readers who once admired Percy's ambition found themselves confused, even angered by his choices. His estrangement from the Weasley family felt cold, calculated. He rejected not only his father's integrity and his mother's love, but the very essence of the family's bond. His departure wasn't quiet. He defended the Ministry's stance against Harry, against Dumbledore, and even against his own flesh and blood. He moved out. He stopped writing. He returned unopened letters. In Order of the Phoenix, Rowling describes how Molly Weasley reached out again and again, only to be met with silence. Percy's absence at Christmas dinner was more than just a missing place at the table. It was a wound. When Fred and George launched their fireworks across the Hogwarts corridors, rebelling against Umbridge and the suffocating rule of the Ministry, Percy was on the other side. He was the one who had always followed the rules, and now the rules demanded he deny the truth. But Percy didn't see himself as a traitor. That's what makes his story so painfully human. In her response to a reader's letter, J.K. Rowling explained that Percy's arc is a story of pride, of being wrong, and of the courage it takes to admit your mistakes. It is not, as many assumed, a simple tale of betrayal and redemption. It is the story of a man who convinced himself he was doing the right thing, and then realized, too late, the cost of that belief. The return of Percy during the Battle of Hogwarts was not just a narrative twist or a convenient reappearance. It was the culmination of years of silent suffering and internal conflict. Rowling admitted that Percy's greatest punishment was his own conscience. He knew, she wrote, that every time he didn't respond to his mother's letter, he was burning a bridge, and he believed he had to burn those bridges to prove he was right. But being right, Percy learned, is a lonely place to be. When the ministry began to fall under the grip of Voldemort's ideology, when friends were persecuted and when truth became dangerous, Percy began to see the cracks. The pivotal moment came when he realized that everything he had clung to, the structure, the chain of command, the official truth, was a lie. He saw innocent people being condemned. He saw Dolores Umbridge rise in power. He saw the corruption eat away at the ministry from within. And yet, he hesitated. Pride, as Rowling noted, is a powerful force. To admit he had been wrong would mean admitting that his father, Arthur Weasley, had been right all along. It would mean facing Molly's tears. It would mean explaining to Fred and George why he hadn't come back sooner. And still he came. When Percy returned during the Battle of Hogwarts, it was not as a hero charging into glory, but as a man weighed down by regret. Rowling chose not to dramatize his return with fanfare. Instead, she wrote it in a single sentence, tucked quietly into the chaos of the battle. Percy was shaking hands with everyone, Fred clapping him on the back. The understated nature of that line spoke volumes. There were no grand apologies, no long speeches, just presence, just a brother standing shoulder to shoulder with his family again. It was Fred who welcomed him back first, a choice that now feels both beautiful and unbearably tragic, because moments later Fred Weasley would die in that same battle, and Percy, who had just found his way home, would be the one to hold his brother's body. Rowling called that scene one of the most emotionally difficult moments she ever wrote. In Deathly Hallows, the line cuts like glass. Percy was screaming, was wrestling with the Death Eaters as Fred lay prone on the ground, and Harry saw George fighting his way to his brother's side. Percy had been back for mere minutes, and already the price of his delay was a lifetime of grief. But Percy stayed. He didn't run. He didn't crumble. In that moment, surrounded by war and loss, he fought, not just the Death Eaters, but the guilt that had haunted him. He fought for the family he had once abandoned. He fought with everything he had, because, as Rowling said, there are no second chances in war, but there are moments of clarity. And Percy finally saw what mattered. His journey is one of the most underrated arcs in the Harry Potter series. He never received the spotlight that Harry, Ron, or Hermione did. He never wielded a sword or hunted Horcruxes or faced Voldemort. But he fought a quieter, more painful battle, the battle against his own pride. Percy's redemption didn't come in a moment of bravery, but in 1,000 small decisions. The choice to walk away from the ministry, the decision to return to Hogwarts, the courage to stand beside a brother he hadn't spoken to in years. Many fans have debated why Rowling didn't give Percy a more dramatic reconciliation scene, but that's not who Percy was. He wasn't a man of grand gestures. He was a man who believed in order and who had to unlearn the idea that order was always good. His return was humble because Percy himself was humbled. Rowling explained he didn't come back expecting forgiveness. He came back because he couldn't stay away, because when the darkness truly fell, he knew where his light was. There is a moment in Deathly Hallows that many miss, but that says everything about Percy's transformation. After Fred's death, he remains at Hogwarts, he helps carry bodies, he comforts his mother. He is seen not as a politician or a clerk, but as a son, a brother, a Weasley. In that silence, Rowling gave Percy dignity. He didn't need words, he needed to stay. The complexity of Percy's arc is a reflection of real life. How many of us have held on to a belief only to find ourselves isolated because of it? How many times have we chosen pride over peace? Percy's story is not about a spectacular fall and rise. It is about the long, painful path back to love. It is about how people fail, and how, when they do, it takes tremendous courage to face those they've hurt. In a letter Rowling shared with a fan, she elaborated that Percy wanted to be respected not for who he was, but for what he represented. That distinction was key. While Ron found pride in being a Weasley, Percy sought validation beyond it. But in the end, the place he ran from was the only place that welcomed him back without question. And they did welcome him. Molly hugged him. Arthur nodded without words. Even George, shattered by Fred's death, gave him a space to grieve. No one said, "I told you so," because in war there's no time for bitterness. Only the living remain, and they must love one another all the more. Percy's final moments in the series are marked not by speeches or apologies, but by quiet loyalty. When Harry walks to his death, Percy stands nearby. When the dead are counted, he helps carry them. When the castle begins to rebuild, he is there. His redemption isn't sealed with magic, it is sealed with presence. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson Percy offers, that it is never too late to return, but the cost of delay can be immense. That family is not defined by agreement, but by forgiveness, and that in the darkest moments when the world seems lost, there is strength in coming home. J.K. Rowling did not need to justify Percy's return, but she did, and in doing so she gave readers a rare glimpse into the emotional architecture of her world. She showed that even the most disciplined heart can break, and that broken hearts, when mended, can beat with even greater strength. Percy Weasley will never be the favourite Weasley, but he may be the most human. His mistakes were loud, but his return was quiet, and sometimes the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. Number 20. What happened to Credence, Aurelius Dumbledore? When the first whispers of fantastic beasts, the crimes of Grindelwald, reached the ears of devoted Harry Potter fans, the reveal that Credence Barebone was, in fact, Aurelius Dumbledore sent shockwaves through the fandom. A brother to Albus Dumbledore, it sounded unthinkable. Nowhere in the 7 volumes of the original Harry Potter series was there any mention of such a figure. The Dumbledore family tree seemed well documented. Percival, Kendra, Albus, Aberforth, and the tragic Ariana. Yet here, in this new era of wizarding history, stood a young man consumed by pain and mystery, an obscurial, fragile and deadly, standing at the center of a revelation too strange to ignore. The fans asked. They questioned Rowling in forums, interviews and letters. Who was Aurelius Dumbledore? How could he fit into the timeline? And most importantly, why was his name never uttered by Harry, by Aberforth, or even by Albus himself? Rowling, ever the architect of hidden truths, did not provide a blunt, encyclopedic answer. Instead, she allowed the silence to speak. In interviews and notes surrounding the films, she alluded to Credence's fate as tragic, one marked not by legacy, but by manipulation, secrecy, and erasure. His story was a wound that Albus never dared reopen. To understand Credence is to understand suffering. Born likely in the early 1900s, he was abandoned as an infant and left to the rigid cruelty of Mary Lou Barebone, an anti-witchcraft zealot who led the new Salem Philanthropic Society. Under her oppressive hand, he learned to fear magic, to fear himself, and to repress his identity so deeply that it burst forth as an obscurus. This dark, parasitic force is a rare phenomenon in young witches and wizards who are forced to suppress their magic, and it almost always leads to death before the age of 10. But Credence survived longer, a testament to his staggering magical potential and the depth of his trauma. In Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, Credence is not merely a victim, he is a symbol, a boy without identity, warped into something terrifying by the abuse he endured and the powers he was never taught to control. When Gellert Grindelwald, disguised as Percival Graves, takes interest in him, Credence believes for the first time that he matters, that someone sees him. Grindelwald exploits this longing. He promises Credence acceptance, guidance, and purpose, but only as a means to find the obscurial he believes is threatening New York. Ironically, Credence is the obscurial. This first manipulation is key. Throughout his short life, Credence was never his own person. He was an object, passed between fanatics and tyrants, stripped of agency. Even when Grindelwald reveals his supposed true heritage, that he is Aurelius Dumbledore, the lost brother of Albus, he does so not with kindness, but as a calculated move in his war against the Dumbledores. The name is a weapon, not a gift. The truth is twisted into a lie, or perhaps a half-truth. Grindelwald names a phoenix at Credence's side and says, "It will always appear to a Dumbledore in need." The symbolism is striking, but so is the manipulation. There is no joy in this revelation, only confusion and pain. Rowling's answer to the fans, though indirect, carries a heavy weight. Credence never lived to see the era of Harry Potter. He died before the world knew Voldemort's name, before Hogwarts became a battleground, before Dumbledore met his end on the Astronomy Tower. His existence, veiled in mystery, ended in sorrow. The films imply that Credence's Obscurus is killing him. In The Secrets of Dumbledore, he's visibly deteriorating. The toll of carrying the Obscurial is immense. Magic turned inward is a slow poison, and by the time he learns fragments of his true identity, that he is the son of Aberforth Dumbledore, it is already too late. The irony of Credence's final arc is that he only finds a shred of peace when he is dying. When Aberforth acknowledges him not as a pawn, not as a weapon, but as a son, there is a tenderness that Credence has never known. "I always knew I had a son," Aberforth says. "I didn't know it was you." Those words, though sparse, are the first real anchor of love Credence ever receives, but it comes at the end of his journey, not the beginning. And though his body is failing, for the first time he belongs to something, not Grindelwald's army, not the Barebone cult, but to a family, however fractured. The silence in the original Harry Potter series is now painted in sorrowful tones. Albus, often seen as omniscient, held this painful secret within himself. As he told Harry in the Order of the Phoenix, "Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." It is a line that echoes Credence's life. Albus Dumbledore, who carried so many burdens, Ariana's death, his estrangement from Aberforth, his youthful bond with Grindelwald, could not bear to revisit the wound that was Aurelius. In the end, it wasn't a conspiracy of omission, but a private grief too sharp to voice. It is also telling that the wizarding world largely believed Credence to be dead or to never have existed at all. In magical history, there are lost children, hidden names, and quietly buried tragedies. Credence was one of these. His existence was shadowed, his records likely obscured or falsified. Whether by Grindelwald's design or the shame of the Dumbledore family, his presence vanished from official memory. It is a tragic but plausible truth in the wizarding world, a place where secrets are protected not by silence alone, but by enchantments and obfuscation. There is a deeper commentary in Rowling's decision to let Credence die before the era of Harry. The world that Harry enters is one where Dumbledore is already a towering figure, revered and mysterious. If Aurelius had lived, if he had become known, it would have changed the legacy of Albus Dumbledore. But Rowling preserves that ambiguity. Credence's life is a reminder that the wizarding world is built not only on spells and houses and prophecy, but also on buried sorrow. Some stories are not told, not because they are unimportant, but because they are too painful. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry, "It is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more." Credence was the embodiment of that unknown, not just in death, but in life. He was a figure of uncertain origin, unstable power, and unknowable motives. His story challenges the very structure of legacy and identity in the wizarding world. Who gets remembered? Who gets erased? Credence, or Aurelius, as some might call him, became a ghost before his time. The real tragedy is that Credence was never evil. Even as an obscurial, even in his moments of violence, He was driven by desperation, not hatred. His outbursts were cries for help, not declarations of war. The darkness within him was not born from ambition, but from repression. In this, he mirrors another figure Rowling gave us, Severus Snape. Both were men defined by pain, who masked their tenderness with fury. But where Snape lived long enough to atone, Credence did not. His story is incomplete, not by narrative failure, but by design. Rowling's careful omission of Aurelius from the main books is now understood not as a plot hole, but as an act of restraint. To include him would be to alter the emotional landscape of Dumbledore. It would also risk undermining the thematic balance of the original series, which focused so tightly on chosen families rather than lost ones. But through the Fantastic Beasts films, Rowling opens a shadow chapter, one that runs parallel to the one Harry knows. It's a chapter soaked in ambiguity, pain, and above all, humanity. Even in the secrets of Dumbledore, there is no grand redemption arc for Credence. He does not cast a final spell, he does not die a hero. He fades, quietly. A boy whose life was shaped by the wrong hands, whose name was used as a weapon, and whose soul craved a simple truth, to be loved. And in the last moments, with Aberforth at his side, he receives that truth. Not in full, not with fanfare, but enough to ease the end. There is no grave for Credence in the books, no portrait, no monument, but there is memory stitched between the silences in Dumbledore's voice, in the tears he never sheds, in the secrets he carries to the grave. Credence Barebone was never meant to be a legend. He was meant to be a reminder that not all magic is glorious, and not all wizards are saved. In this, Rowling offers a quiet, devastating truth. The magical world, like our own, is full of stories that never make it into history. Lives that flicker and vanish, unseen but no less real. Credence was one of them, not a footnote, but a whispered name, a forgotten brother, a question left unanswered for decades. And when readers asked Rowling what became of him, she did not spin a comforting tale. She didn't promise that he lived in secret or that he would one day return. She said enough to break the heart, that Credence was a tool in other people's games, that he died before Harry's time, that Albus kept his silence because the truth was too painful to speak, and in that silence we hear everything we need to know. In the end, Credence's story is not about bloodlines or family trees. It is about the cost of being unwanted, of being used, of being misunderstood by those with power. And it is about the thin, trembling hope that, even in the end, someone might reach out their hand and say, "You mattered." That perhaps is what Rowling wanted us to understand. Not all stories end in triumph. Some end in silence, but even silent stories leave echoes, and Credence Barebone's echo, though faint, still lingers in the shadows of the wizarding world. Number 21. Why did Harry forgive Snape? Severus Snape was never meant to be liked. From the first moment Harry Potter set foot in Hogwarts, Snape cast a shadow over his school life, cold, sarcastic, and unfair. He bullied students without remorse, particularly Neville Longbottom, whose potion failures seemed to be a personal offence to him. He favoured Slytherins, despised Gryffindors, and made it no secret that Harry, in particular, earned his deepest scorn. But years later, Harry would name his own son Albus Severus and call Snape the bravest man I ever knew. How did that transformation happen? How did the boy who was despised come to revere the man who mistreated him? J.K. Rowling herself addressed this question from fans. She explained that the key lies in one of the most important and emotionally complex chapters in the entire saga, The Prince's Tale. There, after Snape's death, Harry finally uncovers the truth hidden behind the scowls and cruelty, the truth that changes everything. Snape's memories, given to Harry in the dying moments of his life, revealed a man, not of pure virtue, but of immeasurable sacrifice. Snape's story was never about redemption in the traditional sense. He did not seek forgiveness, nor did he attempt to make peace with Harry in life. What Harry discovered was not an apology, but a portrait of a man torn by guilt and duty, who chose love and loyalty over bitterness. even though that love had long been lost. The boy who once believed Snape was a servant of evil learned that the truth was far more complicated. And that complexity is what drew Harry to forgiveness. The scene in the Pensieve is critical. Harry enters Snape's memories and finds a young boy named Severus watching a girl named Lily Evans playing in a field. That moment, innocent and tender, is the foundation of everything that would follow. Snape's love for Lily was not a passing fancy or childish affection. It was the core of his being. When she was lost, he did not move on. Instead, he made a vow, one that would dictate the rest of his life, to protect her son, even though that child bore the face of the man Snape hated most. That hatred of James Potter complicated everything. James had bullied Snape at school, humiliated him, and eventually won Lily's heart. It was easy for readers to dislike Snape for his venomous resentment, but what Harry comes to understand is that love and hate are often closer than we think. Snape's behavior wasn't excused, it was explained. And Harry, standing in the ruins of the battle that claimed so many lives, sees the agony Snape carried every day. In Rowling's words, Harry's forgiveness comes not from forgetting the pain, but from recognizing the cost of Snape's sacrifice. Snape, after all, chose to work as a double agent for Dumbledore, living a lie so dangerous it could have unraveled at any moment. He walked the line between Voldemort's inner circle and the Order of the Phoenix, never truly trusted by either side. And he did so not for glory, not for reward, but to keep a promise. That promise, to protect Harry for Lily's sake, was born not of affection for the boy, but of enduring grief and guilt. One of the most poignant revelations is when Dumbledore asks Snape, "After all this time?" And Snape replies, "Always." That single word became the defining symbol of his loyalty. It was not a perfect loyalty. Snape made cruel choices. He was vindictive, he humiliated students, and he allowed his bitterness to fester. But in spite of all that, he never abandoned his duty. Rowling emphasizes this duality. Snape was both hero and tormentor, but he made the hard choice over and over to do what was right, no matter the personal cost. Harry, who had once viewed the world in clear lines of good and evil, begins to understand that courage can wear many faces. It is not only found in noble acts of valor, but in lonely, thankless perseverance. Snape had no friends, no family, no allies. He worked in silence, under suspicion, with his name cursed by the very people he was trying to save. That is a specific kind of bravery, and Harry recognized it. When Harry walked to his death in the Forbidden Forest, ready to sacrifice himself to destroy the final Horcrux, he did so, knowing that Snape had walked a similar path, not for recognition, not for love returned, but because it was the only way forward. In that moment, Harry and Snape were not so different. Both chose sacrifice over vengeance, both carried unbearable burdens, and both did so with the hope that others might live in peace. Rowling clarified that forgiveness does not mean approval. Harry did not forget the years of bullying, nor did he condone the way Snape treated Neville or Hermione, but he understood that Snape's anger came from a place of deep pain. And once he saw that pain, once he understood the motivations beneath the cruelty, he saw a man who deserved not admiration, but compassion. Snape's protection of Harry went beyond mere obligation. When Voldemort returned, it was Snape who kept the students at Hogwarts as safe as he could, without blowing his cover. It was Snape who gave Dolores Umbridge false information, delaying her more dangerous inquiries. It was Snape who sent the sword of Gryffindor to Harry in the forest, risking discovery by Death Eaters. These were not grand gestures, they were silent, hidden acts of resistance, and Harry would only see them in hindsight. In naming his son after Snape, Harry was not erasing the pain of the past. He was honoring the difficult truth that heroism often comes from unlikely places. "Albus Severus," he says, "you were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was probably the bravest man I ever knew." It is a statement that bridges the old rivalries, heals the divisions, and redefines courage. The books themselves reflect this evolution. In the early years, Snape is a clear antagonist, but Rowling, masterful in her planning, never allows his role to be one-dimensional. The clues are all there, his Patronus matching Lily's dough, his subtle interventions, his veiled warnings. Only in the end does the full picture emerge. And it is devastating. Snape was not a good man, but he was a brave one. Perhaps the most tragic element of Snape's life is that he never forgave himself. He carried his guilt like armor. He did not expect gratitude. He did not seek redemption. He simply endured. That is why when Harry looked into the pensieve and saw Snape's memories, he did not see a man seeking absolution. He saw a man who had already given everything. Forgiveness, Rowling explains, is not about forgetting. It is about understanding. When Harry saw Snape's love for Lily, unrequited, unwavering, and ultimately all-consuming, he saw a mirror of his own grief. He saw that Snape, for all his flaws, had loved someone so deeply that it changed the course of his life. And that love, however complicated, was real. Even in the Battle of Hogwarts, Snape never stopped fighting. His final moments were not of glory, but of desperate urgency. He gave Harry his memories not to clear his name, but to ensure the truth was known. He died with no assurances, no recognition, no final peace. But he died having kept his promise. Rowling's choice to show Snape as both cruel and courageous was deliberate. It challenges the reader to move beyond simple binaries. In a world of magic, where wands cast spells and prophecies shape destinies, the greatest power remains love. And Snape's story is, at its core, a tragedy built on love, a love that outlasted death, transformed hatred, and redeemed a life not through perfection, but through choice. Harry's forgiveness was not easy, it was not immediate, but it was earned. Snape gave everything, and in return, he asked for nothing. That silence spoke louder than any apology. And when Harry, years later, stood on platform 934 with his own children, he chose to speak the truth that had remained hidden for so long, that even those who hurt us can also protect us, and that even the darkest hearts can choose light. In understanding Snape, Harry grew up. He saw past the surface, past the bitterness and cruelty, to the man within, and in doing so, he became more than a survivor. He became someone capable of grace. Rowling gave us that final gift, the knowledge that even in the darkest of stories, there can be light, and even the most unlikely of people can change the world, one painful, silent choice at a time. Number 22. Why can't Avada Kedavra be blocked by a shield charm? The killing curse, Avada Kedavra. Green light, no sound, no second chance. It is the most feared of all spells in the wizarding world, and for good reason. Unlike Expelliarmus or Stupefy, Avada Kedavra has no countercurse. It cannot be blocked by conventional magical means, no matter how skilled the wizard. It is pure death given form, and that is no accident of magic. J.K. Rowling, in direct communication with readers, confirmed a deeply symbolic truth. Avada Kedavra is not merely a powerful spell, but an embodiment of malice so potent it lies beyond the reach of protective magic. In the wizarding world, shield charms are as common as wands. The basic defense spell, Protego, has served generations of witches and wizards in countless duels and battles. Harry Potter himself, despite his young age, used Protego regularly, often to remarkable effect. During the Battle of the Department of Mysteries in Order of the Phoenix, the air shimmered with shield charms cast by both sides, walls of magic fending off curses, jinxes, and hexes, but none dared believe a simple shield could deflect a flash of green. This truth is hammered home time and time again in the series. When Bellatrix Lestrange murders Sirius Black, she does not need a clever incantation. One killing curse, one stroke of unforgiving intent, and he is gone. Dumbledore later says there is no counter-curse. There is no blocking it. Only one known person has ever survived it, and he's standing right in front of me. That was Harry. And his survival had nothing to do with power, talent, or shielding spells. It was love that saved him. Rowling's answer to readers about the nature of Avada Kedavra revealed something even more disturbing. Unlike most spells which require technical skill or verbal precision, Avada Kedavra demands emotional corruption. It must be fueled by genuine hatred, by a bone-deep desire to kill. It is not just magic, it is an act of pure murder. The wand merely channels what already exists in the heart. No shield can reflect the soul. The symbolic structure of the wizarding world is tightly bound to moral ideas. Love protects, hate destroys. And in the case of the killing curse, there is a line that cannot be crossed backward. You cannot be half-committed. You cannot be angry or frightened or desperate. You must want the death. It is the totality of this intent that makes Avada Kedavra unreflectable. It is final, not because of its mechanics, but because of its meaning. This is why Harry's use of disarming spells, even in lethal situations, becomes so significant. During his duel with Voldemort in Deathly Hallows, Voldemort casts Avada Kedavra, the purest curse of death, and Harry casts Expelliarmus, the spell of mercy. The two spells collide, not because Expelliarmus is technically equal to Avada Kedavra, but because the wands share a core, the phoenix feather of Fawkes. Their brotherhood, their twin nature, creates an effect far beyond magical theory. And yet again, Rowling shows us it's not magic alone, but deeper truths. Loyalty, destiny, love that shift outcomes. In Goblet of Fire, we see the terrible mechanics of the curse during the Dark Lord's rebirth and duel with Harry. When Voldemort raises his wand and shouts, Avada Kedavra, it is with no hesitation, no remorse. The air itself cracks, but what shields Harry in that moment is the twin core effect, priori incantatem, in a phenomenon rare and unnatural. Again, not a shield, not a spell, a miracle born of the shared past and a deeper bond. And here is the bitter lesson. Avada Kedavra is not unstoppable because it is complex. It is unstoppable because it is simple. There is nothing to interrupt, no secondary effect, no physical force to resist. It does not push, it ends. The curse does not fight you, it denies your existence. That is why traditional shields, even the most advanced forms of Protego Maxima, are useless. You can't deflect something that is pure conclusion. Rowling's statement made clear that the killing curse represents not just magical power but philosophical extremity. It is the end point of moral failure. The person who casts it has stepped into darkness so deep no light can bend around them, and this is why only exceptional forces, forces outside normal magic, can resist it. Lily Potter's sacrifice created such a force. Her death, freely chosen for love, forged a protective bond that Voldemort could neither see nor understand. Even Snape, master of occlumency and dueling, did not attempt to block Avada Kedavra when Voldemort used it against him. Snape understood its nature. The curse is not about winning a fight, it is about removing a life, and that act, when done with full intent, allows no contest unless some deeper law is at play. Severus's death was swift, brutal, and unstoppable, a demonstration of what the curse always promised. Albus Dumbledore, perhaps the most powerful wizard of the age, never taught Harry how to block the curse. Instead, he taught him love. He taught him compassion and choice, and the importance of mercy. He knew that no spellbook, no dueling club could offer protection from a magic that required not knowledge but soul death. And in that understanding he prepared Harry for the only real counter to Avada Kedavra: self-sacrifice. In Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore is disarmed and vulnerable on the astronomy tower, he does not cast Protego, he does not raise his wand, he speaks quietly to Draco and then to Snape. He knows what is coming, he knows the curse cannot be stopped. The only magic he hopes for in that moment is understanding, perhaps forgiveness. That scene, chilling and tragic, is the perfect example. Even the greatest wizard accepts that Avada Kedavra cannot be undone. The Ministry of Magic's records indicate that using Avada Kedavra successfully requires not only intent, but power. The average witch or wizard cannot cast it effectively. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, says as much during his defense against the dark arts lesson. You need to mean it. And that truth reinforces Rowling's point. The curse is not about saying words, but about what lies behind them. One of the most striking examples comes from Order of the Phoenix, when Voldemort possesses Harry at the Ministry. In that scene, Harry feels such overwhelming pain and hatred that Voldemort attempts to break him from the inside. But Harry's heart holds love for Sirius, for his friends, for the people who have stood by him. That love, pouring through him, forces Voldemort out. Not a spell, not a shield. Love, the very force Voldemort fears and despises. There is, however, one scene where an almost seems to occur. In the final duel at Hogwarts, when Voldemort and Harry face each other in front of the whole school, the killing curse and the disarming charm may clash once again. Their beams meet, green and red. And in that flash of light, something extraordinary happens. Voldemort's curse rebounds just as it did when he tried to kill Harry as a baby, but this is not a reflection in the sense of a shield. It is a consequence of wand ownership, of broken allegiance. The Elder Wand refuses to kill its true master. Magic, again, bends to loyalty and fate, not defense spells. That duel ends with Voldemort's death, not because Harry was more powerful, but because Voldemort never understood the rules. He believed in domination, in fear, in murder. Harry believed in choice. In that final instant, it was not Protego that saved him. It was everything he had become. There's a painful elegance in the fact that Avada Kedavra, so often wielded by cowards and tyrants, can be undone only by the purest acts. It cannot be deflected, but it can be made irrelevant. Voldemort's downfall was not due to someone casting a stronger spell. It was due to his failure to comprehend love, and Rowling designed this with purpose. She wanted readers to understand that some things are stronger than death. We return again and again to the same idea. Shields protect from harm, but Avada Kedavra is not harm. It is annihilation, and annihilation cannot be shielded. It must be answered with something greater. That is why Rowling told her readers the truth. The only real defense against the killing curse is sacrifice. Lily died to save her son. Harry walked willingly to his death to save others. That magic, deep, old and unspoken, is the true countercurse. In the world of Harry Potter, spells matter. Incantations, wand movement, magical theory, all of it matters. But Rowling layered her universe with another truth. The moral force behind magic is what defines its outcome. A curse spoken with hatred is more deadly than one spoken with fear. A charm cast with love is more powerful than one cast with doubt. Avada Kedavra is not just a killing curse, it is a moral abyss. And to survive it, you must never step near that edge. Thus, the green light remains untouched by shields, even as the red sparks of protection dance against 100 lesser curses, not because the magic is stronger, but because the soul behind it is darker. Avada Kedavra does not require knowledge, it requires surrender, and that is why no shield, no spellbook, no dual tactic can ever contain it. Only love, the oldest and deepest magic, dares to stand in its way. Number 23, why didn't Voldemort have a Patronus? Of all the spells within the world of Harry Potter, none carry such haunting beauty and emotional resonance as the Patronus charm. It is more than just advanced magic. It is the manifestation of hope, love, and the purest joy a soul can summon. Yet among all the powerful witches and wizards we encounter, one name is conspicuously absent from the ranks of Patronus users: Lord Voldemort. The question has long lingered in the minds of readers. Why couldn't the Dark Lord produce a Patronus? And eventually J.K. Rowling herself confirmed the answer. He didn't just choose not to, he simply couldn't. To conjure a Patronus, a witch or wizard must recall a profoundly joyful memory, one suffused with warmth and love. For Harry Potter, it was the echo of his parents' love, even if the memory itself was fragile and second-hand. For Hermione, it might have been a moment of childhood safety, perhaps before the weight of the magical world reshaped her identity. Luna Lovegood's Patronus, a shimmering hair, reflected her deep serenity and acceptance of grief, moulded by quiet strength. These Patronuses were born from their innermost truths, shields forged in the crucible of emotional connection. But Tom Riddle, the boy who became Lord Voldemort, had no such foundation. Born of a loveless union, a magically induced pregnancy brought about by a love potion, he entered the world already devoid of choice, affection, or human warmth. His mother, Merope Gaunt, died shortly after childbirth. His father, Tom Riddle Sr., abandoned them without even knowing he had been manipulated. The child who grew up in the cold halls of a Muggle orphanage did so without the touch of compassion, isolated not only by circumstance but by the growing darkness within him. From his earliest years, Tom demonstrated a chilling detachment from others. He tormented animals, stole from fellow orphans, and displayed a need for control that bordered on obsession. When Albus Dumbledore first met him, the young boy already understood power, not as something shared or nurtured, but something seized and hoarded. In Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore recounts he was already using magic to make others hurt, to frighten them. This wasn't the mischief of a boy discovering magic, it was the sadism of a child already consumed by an inner void. By the time Tom Riddle arrived at Hogwarts, the seed of greatness had already been poisoned. Though he wore a mask of charm and excellence, he never formed genuine friendships. He gathered followers, not companions. He sought knowledge, not wisdom. His growing understanding of magic never brushed the tender territories of emotion or connection. Instead, he gravitated toward the forbidden, the chamber of secrets, Parseltongue, Horcruxes. Every step he took toward power was a step away from humanity. The Patronus charm is described in The Prisoner of Azkaban as a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. For Voldemort, these qualities were alien. He didn't just lack joyful memories, he actively rejected them. Love to him was weakness. Dependency was failure. Even when Bellatrix Lestrange, perhaps the only follower who truly adored him, tried to show devotion, he remained unmoved. His heart was, as Dumbledore once said of another man, shriveled by his own choices. Rowling once explained that Voldemort was incapable of producing a Patronus because the necessary emotion, joy, is simply not present in him. His soul, split into 7 mutilated fragments, had no unified core from which such pure magic could emerge. The Patronus charm is a reflection of the soul, and Voldemort had none left that was whole. He intentionally tore his soul apart, each Horcrux a monument to his fear of death and disdain for love. Consider the contrast between Voldemort and Severus Snape. Though Snape lived in bitterness and committed terrible acts, he could produce a Patronus, a silver doe, because deep within him one unwavering truth burned: his love for Lily Potter. It was a love so enduring that it gave rise to magic of the highest order. Snape's Patronus was not only a beacon, it was his redemption. Voldemort, in all his cunning and power, never loved anyone, and so he had no such redemption. The Patronus charm is not merely about strength, it is about purity of feeling. We see this with Harry, who first learns the spell to combat Dementors, creatures that drain all peace and leave their victims in despair. For Harry, whose life had been marked by trauma, this was no small feat. And yet, the memory of flying with his father, or the imagined joy of being reunited with loved ones, was enough to ignite the Patronus into being. That says everything about Harry, and everything about Voldemort. There is a telling moment in Order of the Phoenix when Dolores Umbridge attempts to perform a Patronus to guard against Dementors in the Ministry. Even this hateful woman can produce one because she believes in her own righteousness. Her happiness may be twisted, but it is still intact. Voldemort's inability goes deeper. It is not about being evil, it is about being emotionally hollow, unable to even remember or manufacture a single moment of joy without corruption. The irony is tragic. Voldemort, who feared death more than anything else, rejected the one magic that symbolized the triumph of life over darkness. In fleeing mortality, he became less alive than anyone. His fear, his hate, his obsession, these were the shadows he clung to, while the Patronus remains forever a spell of light. As Dumbledore told Harry, "Do not pity the dead, Harry, pity the living, and above all, those who live without love." No description better fits Voldemort. And in the end, that lack of love was not only his emotional flaw, it became his downfall. His inability to understand the power of love meant he underestimated Harry, failed to comprehend Snape's motives, and dismissed the strength of Dumbledore's loyalty network. He believed in fear and domination, but not in sacrifice or protection. He saw Harry's ability to summon a Patronus not as something powerful, but as a trivial skill. And yet it symbolized everything he could never have. In Deathly Hallows, we are reminded again of the Patronus' intimate connection to love and identity. When Aberforth Dumbledore sends his goat Patronus to guide the trio, it is not just a defensive act. It's a silent nod to his lost brother, to family, to sorrow and protection. And the Patronus is more than defense. It is memory made flesh, the essence of what one fights for. Voldemort had nothing he truly fought for, only things he feared to lose. Even Dementors, the very creatures the Patronus repels, reflect the psychology of the Dark Lord. They drain happiness and feed on despair, and Voldemort welcomed them into his ranks. He had nothing to fear from them because he had no joy to lose. He was not immune to their effects. Rather, he had already become their kin, spiritually speaking. Where others had to defend their souls, Voldemort's was already a battlefield long lost. J.K. Rowling's explanation is not merely a technical one. It is a mirror held up to Voldemort's entire existence. His inability to cast a Patronus is not a footnote. It is a summation. It tells us more than spells or duels ever could. The strongest magic in the wizarding world does not come from knowledge alone. It comes from heart. Voldemort, for all his brilliance, was heartless, and so the most beautiful charm of all was forever beyond his reach. In many ways, the Patronus stands as the ultimate symbol of who a person truly is. It is their anchor, their light, their past made luminous. For Remus Lupin, it was a guardian that protected him not only from Dementors, but from the self-loathing that came with being a werewolf. For Cho Chang, it was a swan, graceful, mournful, and strong. Each Patronus is a fingerprint of the soul, but Voldemort's soul was no longer whole enough to leave such a mark. The tragedy of Voldemort is not just that he died, it is that he never truly lived. He ruled, threatened, killed, but he never laughed in pure joy, never loved in return, never embraced anyone without calculation. The Patronus, that brilliant shaft of silver light, represents everything he abandoned. In his quest to conquer death, he denied life itself. When readers ask why Voldemort couldn't summon a Patronus, the answer reaches far beyond magic. It is about the cost of choosing darkness so completely that the light no longer recognizes you. Voldemort did not simply lose his way, he destroyed the road behind him. No spell, no ritual, no relic could restore the emotional depth he carved out of himself. He was, quite literally, beyond saving. In the end, we remember not the curses he cast or the armies he raised, but the absence of what he could never summon. The absence of a Patronus stands as a silent testament to a soul without hope, without love, and without redemption. And that, more than any spell, explains why the most powerful dark wizard of all time could never summon a Patronus, because he had nothing left inside worth protecting. Number 24. What happened to the Dementors after Voldemort's fall? Of all the unanswered questions that lingered after the final battle in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, one proved especially haunting, both metaphorically and literally. What happened to the Dementors after the fall of Voldemort? These nightmarish wraiths, known for draining joy and feeding on human despair, had long served the wizarding world as prison guards of Azkaban, but their role always stirred moral unease, and after the rise and fall of a Dark Lord who freely used them to terrorize his enemies, the very idea of keeping such creatures in the employ of the Ministry became increasingly indefensible. In an answer to fans, J.K. Rowling clarified their fate, and in doing so she delivered one of the most symbolic post-war changes in magical governance. When Kingsley Shacklebolt assumed the role of interim Minister for Magic, one of his first reforms was re-evaluating the practices that had enabled Voldemort's rise. Chief among them was the use of Dementors. The use of such creatures to enforce law and order was an old cruelty, a remnant of fear-based governance, Rowling later explained. Under Kingsley's leadership, the Ministry officially cut ties with Dementors. They were expelled from Azkaban. Their presence was deemed both dangerous and morally corrosive. No longer would the magical government rely on fear to maintain control. This decision marked a significant philosophical shift in wizarding society. For decades, wizards had accepted Dementors as a necessary evil. The belief that such dark creatures could be controlled or pacified was deeply embedded in Ministry policy. But the war had shown how easily that control could be lost. During Voldemort's rise to power, the Dementors defected almost immediately to his side, seduced by the promise of widespread despair and unlimited victims. They are creatures of the dark. They will not remain loyal to any but those who offer them the most, Remus Lupin had once warned, prisoner of Azkaban. His words, long dismissed, were finally heeded in full. The idea of using Dementors to guard prisoners was always controversial. Even Albus Dumbledore had spoken against it. In Goblet of Fire, he made his position clear. "You'll find that I will not allow Dementors within the grounds. Their presence is not conducive to the kind of atmosphere I wish to create." Dumbledore's resistance now served as a moral blueprint for the post-war Ministry. The emphasis shifted from control through fear to security through integrity. With Dementors banished from Azkaban, the question of what would replace them became critical. Azkaban could not remain unguarded. It still housed some of the most dangerous dark wizards of the age. The solution was multifaceted. Powerful protective enchantments were layered over the prison's perimeter. Auras, with specialized training, took turns stationed at key access points. Additionally, magical constructs, enchanted to detect intent and immobilize escapees, were deployed. A lesser-known but significant addition came in the form of Thestrals, creatures that could perceive lies and sense death. Their eerie presence made escape not only difficult, but psychologically daunting. The transition wasn't seamless. There were attempts, albeit limited, to resist the removal of the Dementors. Some old guard bureaucrats argued that nothing could instill fear like a creature that devoured your happiness. They saw the Dementors as an effective deterrent. But these voices were silenced by the chilling memory of the Second Wizarding War. Too many remembered the feeling of cold dread that came not only from Voldemort, but from the Ministry itself when it allowed such beings to patrol its halls. No official record reveals where the Dementors went after their expulsion. Their species has never been truly understood. They are not born, they manifest. They multiply in decay, in ruin, in misery. They infest the darkest places, Lupin once said. They drain peace, hope, and happiness out of the air around them. It is believed that the creatures retreated to the far corners of the British Isles, swamps, moors, abandoned ruins where joy is scarce, and no humans linger. Some suspect they moved overseas, attracted to places riddled with conflict and desolation. But their presence was no longer sanctioned, tracked, or used. The symbolic weight of this act cannot be overstated. Just as the Elder Wand was buried with Dumbledore to prevent its misuse, the removal of Dementors from Azkaban represented a burial of dark compromises. It was an unspoken admission. The wizarding world had once allowed monsters to serve its justice system, and it would not repeat that error. For a society recovering from war, the question was no longer what was effective, but what was right. The personal impact of this change was also profound. For survivors like Harry Potter, the absence of Dementors in official spaces brought relief. These were the creatures that had once rendered him helpless, haunted his nights, and nearly cost him his soul. In one of the most terrifying scenes from Order of the Phoenix, Harry faced 2 Dementors in Little Whinging. The Dementor's eyeless face was barely a foot from his own. He could smell its putrid, death-cold breath. It wasn't a dark wizard, but the very weapon of the Ministry that had almost destroyed him. That such beings no longer held institutional power was more than policy. It was personal justice. Not all Dementors were content to fade into the mist. There are unconfirmed reports, whispered among the unspeakables, that a splinter group of the creatures took refuge in Nocturne Alley, attempting to forge pacts with dark artifacts and cursed souls. A series of mysterious disappearances in the early post-war years was quietly attributed to stray Dementors. However, without a Dark Lord to feed them or a state to shelter them, they lacked coordination. Most eventually dissipated or were driven out by a combination of magical light and positive energy charms. Some wizards began researching more humane alternatives for dealing with Dementors. A small department in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, led by a half-blood researcher named Idris Galaran, explored whether Dementors could be isolated and deconstructed, not destroyed, but dissolved into harmless energy. One such experiment in Wales reportedly succeeded in neutralizing a rogue Dementor using a combination of advanced Patronus magic and love-based incantations, spells fueled by memories of healing rather than protection. Though promising, these efforts remain experimental. Even more intriguing is the philosophical legacy of the Dementors. Wizarding thinkers began to speak openly of their symbolism. Dementors remind us that evil often wears the mask of necessity, wrote Elspeth Morwenna in the Transfiguration Today editorial, titled Shadows We Employed. The post-war wizarding world did not merely purge dark forces, it began to examine why such forces had ever been invited in. This cultural shift inspired changes in education as well. At Hogwarts, defense against the dark arts began including ethics modules, courses that questioned not just how to cast spells, but why. Dementors, once feared, became cautionary tales. Interestingly, the Dementors' departure also changed the energy of Azkaban itself. Without their chilling aura, prisoners began to behave differently. Some displayed remorse. Others, who had sunk into silence under the weight of despair, began speaking again. While no one argued that Azkaban should become a place of comfort, it ceased to be a place of spiritual torture. Justice, Kingsley Shacklebolt once told the Wizengamot, should not resemble torment. We fought a war to end such cruelty. Let's not recreate it in our prisons. But it's worth remembering that the Dementors were never fully defeated. They were displaced, not destroyed. Evil, in Rowling's world, is rarely eradicated. It is endured, pushed back, starved of attention. Dementors still exist somewhere, perhaps in the hidden corners of the world, perhaps in the dark spaces of the human soul. As long as despair exists, they can return. "Don't let them in," Lupin had once instructed Harry. "Don't give them a reason." That advice holds, even now. One rumor, never verified, tells of a lone Dementor that made its way to a ruined castle on the northern coast of Scotland. There, a retired Death Eater was said to have built a shrine to Voldemort. He fed the creature memories of war, hate, and revenge. It grew stronger, until a group of young Aurors led by Susan Bones tracked it down. With a synchronized casting of the Patronus charm, they banished the Dementor and dismantled the shrine. Susan later told the Daily Prophet, "Darkness is always looking for a way back. Our job is to keep the light alive." This lesson echoed across generations. Harry, now a father, would later speak to his son Albus about the nature of fear. He didn't mention Dementors by name, but he said, "We all face shadows, some from outside, some from within. What matters is how we respond, what we feed, what we allow to grow." In the end, the fate of the Dementors is not just a story about magical creatures, it's a parable of fear used as policy, of power entrusted to entities without conscience, of a world learning to govern with compassion rather than terror. The Dementors may still wander the earth, but no longer at the behest of the Ministry, and in that there is hope. Number 25. Why didn't Voldemort realize Harry was a Horcrux? The night was cold, soaked in shadow and silence, when Lord Voldemort walked into Godric's Hollow. In his mind, the matter was already settled. The child was nothing, a mere obstacle to be cleared away, a baby whose only crime was being born at the wrong time, under the wrong prophecy. He did not expect resistance from James Potter, nor did he anticipate Lily's choice to die for her son. But what he never imagined, not even as he stood over the crib, his wand raised, was that the act he was about to commit would forever bind his soul to this child in ways darker and more profound than even he could comprehend. The killing curse rebounded, his body was destroyed, and the rest became legend. Yet, somewhere amidst the smoking ruins of his own destruction, a sliver of his fractured soul latched on to the only living being in that room. Harry Potter became, unwittingly, Voldemort's final and most accidental Horcrux. But the Dark Lord never knew. To the casual reader, that seems strange and even absurd. How could a wizard as powerful and cunning as Lord Voldemort, master of dark magic, fail to sense a piece of his own soul lodged within his mortal enemy? The truth is buried beneath layers of psychology, magical theory, and Voldemort's own fatal flaws. And J.K. Rowling herself answered this question with a clarity that only deepens the tragedy of his ignorance. Rowling explained that Voldemort's inability to recognize Harry as a Horcrux was rooted in the very nature of his fragmented soul. The creation of a Horcrux is an act of supreme control. One must kill with intention, then deliberately encase the torn piece of soul within an object through a complex, dark ritual. This was not something Voldemort believed could ever occur by accident. To him, magic was a tool to be mastered, bent to his will. The idea that it could act independently, could choose, was anathema to his worldview. This blind spot proved deadly. When he attempted to kill baby Harry, Voldemort did so expecting the spell to work as it always had. He had murdered countless times before. The act itself did not surprise him, but when the spell backfired, he did not pause to consider that the soul-shattering effects of such powerful magic, combined with Lily's sacrificial protection, might have caused an uncontrolled fragment of his soul to break away. He had never experienced love. He did not respect sacrifice. And above all, he believed himself untouchable by fate. The loss of his body and the collapse of his power consumed him. For years he clung to existence as a formless shadow, kept alive only by the very Horcruxes he had created. I was ripped from my body. I was less than spirit, less than the meanest ghost. But still I was alive, he would later recount in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. This was not a man capable of self-reflection. His thoughts turned not to why he had failed, but to vengeance and restoration. Even when he returned in corporeal form, even after possessing Harry in the Department of Mysteries, he did not suspect the truth. He felt pain, discomfort, resistance, but not recognition. The piece of soul inside Harry had no consciousness. It did not whisper to Voldemort. It did not reach out to him. It simply was. And Voldemort, with his shattered sense of wholeness, no longer had the capacity to feel what was missing, because too much was already lost. It is crucial to remember that Voldemort had splintered his soul multiple times. By Dumbledore's account, 7 times, more if you count the piece left in Harry. With so much damage, his internal compass was broken. His connection to his own essence, to whatever remained of his humanity, was barely functioning. If the soul is the seat of empathy and understanding, then Voldemort was operating as a ghost of a man. Brilliant, yes, but hollowed out to the point of being deaf to the echoes of his own being. Moreover, he did not believe in destiny. Trelawney's prophecy, the one that sent him chasing the Potters in the first place, was not to Voldemort a sacred message from the magical fabric of the world. It was a threat, and he responded accordingly. In his mind, he chose Harry because Harry was the half-blood option, like himself. The idea that fate might have chosen Harry to be his equal, or worse, his undoing, was unacceptable. So how could he accept that something as uncontrollable and irrational as love had resulted in such a magical consequence? Voldemort's arrogance sealed his blindness. He underestimated Harry at every turn. He called him the boy who escaped me, not the boy who changed me. He saw the lightning scar as a scar, and not a symbol. He acknowledged their connection only when it became inconvenient, a telepathic tether he tried to exploit. Even then, he saw it as Dumbledore's interference or some trick of fate, not as a result of his own fractured soul. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry, "You are the seventh Horcrux, Harry, the Horcrux he never meant to make." This line is chilling not just because of its implications, but because it confirms how Voldemort's desire to cheat death had led him to an unintentional act of spiritual self-destruction. He had tried to conquer mortality only to bind himself to the one person destined to defeat him. There is irony in Voldemort's meticulous planning. He carefully chose objects of significance to contain his soul: Slytherin's locket, Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem. He intended to preserve his legacy, his name, his power, but in doing so he overlooked the unthinkable. That magic, in the moment of his greatest error, made a choice for him. It placed a piece of him into the child, whose protection came not from dark arts but from a mother's love. Even as Voldemort tried to exploit their connection in Order of the Phoenix, he misunderstood it. When he possessed Harry in the Ministry, he was repelled by what he felt: love, humanity. "You're the weak one," Harry told him. "You'll never know love or friendship, and I feel sorry for you." At that moment, Voldemort fled, not because he feared Harry's power, but because he could not comprehend it. J.K. Rowling in interviews explained that Voldemort's failure was not magical, but emotional. His contempt for love and sacrifice, the very forces that created the accidental Horcrux, blinded him to the consequences of his actions. He was, in essence, betrayed by his own worldview. By denying that which he could not control, he made himself vulnerable to it. When Harry walked willingly into the Forbidden Forest in Deathly Hallows, Voldemort saw only a boy resigned to death. He did not see the sacrificial magic repeating itself. He did not feel the soul fragment inside Harry being destroyed by the very curse he cast. Even then, with his own soul literally unraveling, he sensed nothing. It was not until his final moments, wand in hand, death looming, that the full scale of his miscalculations came to light. The Elder Wand refused to obey him. The prophecy was fulfilled not through domination, but through understanding and sacrifice. Voldemort's own actions, from the murder of Lily Potter to the creation of multiple Horcruxes, created the conditions for his defeat. His soul, once torn so thoroughly, had nothing left to hold it in place. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is that Voldemort could have known. He was warned, not only by prophecy, but by the fear in the eyes of his followers, the wisdom of Dumbledore, even the loyalty of Severus Snape. But he dismissed it all. He believed in power, in fear, in control. He did not believe in love, and so he never suspected that in trying to kill a baby, he had split his soul one final time, not into a ring or a diary, but into a living boy whose very existence defied everything he thought he knew. Dumbledore would have been happier than anybody to think that there was a little more love in the world, Harry said at the end. That was the difference. That was the thing Voldemort never understood, and never would. Number 26. Why did Hermione choose Ron instead of Harry? As the first snow fell on Hogwarts turrets, a quiet question stirred among the gathered students. Why did Hermione Granger, whose intellect and courage equaled that of Harry Potter, ever look to Ron Weasley's side rather than Harry's? This inquiry, simple in its framing yet profound in its implications, exposes the heart beneath J.K. Rowling's narrative. It was not the grandeur of destiny that bound their hearts, but the delicate threads of vulnerability, balance, and genuine understanding. Although Harry carried the weight of prophecy and Hermione the brilliance of scholarship, Ron offered something neither could on their own, a shared sense of imperfection and the freedom to simply be themselves. From the moment Hermione corrected Neville's pronunciation in Charms class, demonstrating her encyclopedic knowledge of arithmancy and flair for academic precision, she revealed a mind always in careful motion. Yet by the end of their first year, as the trio faced down the Sorcerer's Stone, it was Ron, blundering, joking, and yet unfailingly loyal, who dropped his wand to stand by her side in the dark corridor. That choice spoke volumes. Hermione did not seek a flawless champion, but a partner who would welcome her tempest of thoughts without asking her to soften them. In a rare candid moment, Rowling admitted she recognized how Harry and Hermione might have looked perfect on a status sheet, hero and heroine aligned in purpose and drive, but she knew the tale needed other elements. Heroism was not enough. Human drama demanded growth through weakness, and love required more than admiration for brilliance. Friendship, she whispered between the lines, thrives in the shadows of insecurity, not in the glare of infallibility. Harry and Hermione shared a customary division of labor, he with courage fueled by purpose, she with intellect guided by reason. Their similarities, alone in childhood, fiercely loyal, burdened by prophecy, might have fostered a deep bond, yet they ran the risk of competition rather than complement. Two leaders vying for the same mantle might falter. Instead, Hermione turned to Ron's quieter orbit. He needed her advice on homework, she needed him to remind her laughter still mattered. Ron Weasley's impulsive kindness shone repeatedly when Hermione felt engulfed by the weight of expectation. It was he who, after a long day in the library, produced a cricket bat to heft off her shoulders, joking that he'd trade every essay she ever wrote for one genuine smile. In his clumsy way, Ron reminded Hermione that bravery meant trusting another to see you at your worst and choose to stay. Hermione's relentless drive for perfection masked a soft center that only Ron discovered. She carried the burden of the house elves' cause through prison cells and Deathly Hallows camps. He simply sat beside her by the dying embers, pulling her into a world where enough was not a failure, but a beginning. When she quaked before the locket's malice, it was Ron's trembling fingers, brushing her own, that anchored her to reality. Hermione did not flinch from the possibility of love, but she sought authenticity. She once declared, "When in doubt, go to the library," and yet in Ron's gaze found libraries she never knew existed, rooms filled with impulsive laughter, assurances given without footnotes, and a shared belief that mistakes meant growth. He was not the hero she'd read about, but the companion who asked nothing but to walk beside her. At the Yule Ball, Hermione's gown caught every eye, and Harry's steady presence remained stoic at her side. But when Ron appeared, shell-shocked and red-faced, he offered her flowers as though presenting a holy grail. In that moment she chose laughter over propriety, imperfection over poised restraint, a dance marked by two people who treasured honesty over ceremony. In the Chamber of Secrets, as Hermione collapsed from the basilisk's poison, it was Ron who caught her, covering her trembling frame with his cloak. He watched through tears as Harry fetched the mandrake potion, but it was Ron's vigil, his whispered promises to never let her suffer alone, that illuminated Hermione's heart long before any restorative draught could heal. When Dolores Umbridge sought to humiliate Hermione in the Department of Mysteries, denying her right to speak, Ron's fierce defense, his booming voice cracking the sterile air, showed her that raw emotion could defeat polished rhetoric. He valued her intellect so deeply that he refused to let bureaucracy silence it, teaching Hermione that her convictions were strong enough to deserve guardianship. The Goblet of Fire tested their bond with a blade of jealousy. When Hermione cheered Harry's name in the crowd, Ron's face fell, a storm cloud of hurt. Yet seconds later, guilt overrode resentment, and he shoved aside wounded pride to help rig scoring snaffles during the first task. Their reconciliation, marked by an awkward hug in the hospital wing, burned into Hermione's soul the truth that forgiveness, not flawlessness, cements true partnership. In the darkest hours of Deathly Hallows, when fear drove Ron to flee, Hermione's shattered heart learned a final lesson. Love demands risk. Through his cold absence, she discovered that his presence had been her anchor. When Ron returned, exhausted, tear-stained, clutching the Deluminator and Gryffindor's sword, Hermione rose without hesitation. That reunion, more than any victory over Voldemort, proved that imperfection steeped in courage outweighed any promise of unerring valor. Their shared quest for the Horcruxes illuminated their essential strengths, Hermione's precise incantations and encyclopedic recall, Ron's intuitive leaps and battlefield bravery. When he commanded Accio Horcrux and it obeyed, Hermione wept with quiet awe, not simply at magic, but at the moment when she realized Ron's valor could match her own reasoning. Ron's humor tempered Hermione's seriousness. In the bleak forest before Godric's Hollow, he recounted Fred's latest prank, and Hermione laughed so fully that the forest seemed less terrifying. That laughter, blossoming from trust and shared history, became the mortar binding their souls during trials where logic alone would have fractured. Hermione's journey taught her that smarts could isolate as much as empower. Ron's willingness to share his doubts, spilling his fears in mumbled confessions by dead campfires, offered her proof that vulnerability could be a bridge, not a barrier. In Ron's uncertainty, she found her purpose, not as a lone scholar changing the world, but as a partner growing alongside someone who cherished every facet of her being. Rowling once noted that human drama demanded flaws, that growth emerged not from static perfection, but from the tension of opposites learning to fuse. In Hermione and Ron, that tension sparked countless triumphs. He discovered that love thrives less on self-assurance than on mutual devotion. She learned that passion sometimes requires the leap, not the plan. Their union echoes through every corridor of Hogwarts, from the whispering portraits of Ravenclaw's history to the battle-scarred walls of the Great Hall. Together they embody the lesson whispered on the wind, that the greatest magic lies in two souls willing to honor each other's weaknesses as much as their strengths. In choosing Ron, Hermione chose a story richer than prophecy. She chose the warmth of laughter at midnight over the solemn nod of fate. She chose the fine art of compromise over the singular pursuit of glory. Their journey reminds us that love, like the greatest enchantment, is less about dazzling power than about the gentle reciprocity of two hearts beating at the same imperfect pace. Number 27. Why did some students return for an 8th year at Hogwarts? After the Battle of Hogwarts, the world of magic was in disarray. The triumph of the wizarding community over Voldemort was a monumental victory, but it came at a heavy price. The school year had been cut short due to the devastating conflict, leaving the students' futures uncertain. Amidst the destruction and loss, there lingered one significant question. Who among the students returned to complete their education at Hogwarts? It was a question that J.K. Rowling, the beloved author of the Harry Potter series, personally addressed to her readers. In an answer that would clarify the paths of some of her most cherished characters, Rowling confirmed that while Hermione Granger returned to complete her studies, Harry Potter and Ron Weasley did not. In the aftermath of the battle, Hogwarts was left in ruins, and the surviving students were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered world. For Harry, the decision to leave Hogwarts behind was a natural one. As the boy who lived, Harry had proven himself in ways that few could understand. His role in the defeat of Voldemort and his immense battle experience led him straight into a career with the Ministry of Magic, specifically as an Auror. He was given this position not because of his academic excellence, but due to his unparalleled experience in combat. The ministry recognized that no matter what Harry had missed in terms of his formal education, his first-hand knowledge of the dark forces that had plagued the wizarding world made him an invaluable asset to their forces. Ron Weasley, always a faithful companion to Harry, also made his decision quickly after the battle. However, unlike Harry, Ron didn't jump directly into a high-risk career with the ministry. Instead, he followed his own path, one that was equally in tune with his personality and interests. After much contemplation, Ron chose to join his brothers, Fred and George, in their joke shop business. The Weasley twins had already established a successful venture in Diagon Alley, and Ron's return to help run the family business felt like a logical step. Although not as thrilling as Harry's career as an Auror, Ron found joy and satisfaction in working alongside his brothers, continuing the legacy of laughter and light-heartedness that the Weasley family had long been known for. But what about the other students, the ones who, while not necessarily famous for their bravery or their pivotal roles in the battle, still wanted to complete their education? Many of these students, particularly those from Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, returned to Hogwarts to finish what they had started. Hermione Granger, of course, was one of the most prominent examples. Known for her studious nature and her unwavering commitment to learning, Hermione did not hesitate for a second when it came to her education. She had already spent so much of her time studying, sacrificing sleep and socializing in pursuit of academic excellence. She wasn't about to let the war interrupt her progress. Despite the destruction that had befallen Hogwarts, Hermione's resolve remained unshaken. She returned to school, determined to finish her education and prove that the triumph over Voldemort had not diminished the importance of knowledge. Her hard work paid off. As Rowling revealed, Hermione not only returned to Hogwarts but also excelled in her studies, passing her exams with flying colours. She was awarded the highest marks in all of her subjects, a testament to her intellectual abilities and her unrelenting dedication. Hermione's return to Hogwarts was not just about finishing her studies, but about reclaiming the normalcy that had been so violently interrupted by the war. While Hermione's return seemed like a natural progression for her, it was a different story for some of the other students. There were many who had been profoundly affected by the events of the war and the losses they had experienced. For students like Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley and others, the choice to return to school wasn't a straightforward one. Many of them had seen the horrors of the battle firsthand and had lost loved ones in the process. Ginny, in particular, had experienced the loss of her brother Fred, an event that had left her heartbroken and changed forever. However, like Hermione, Ginny was driven by a sense of duty and a desire to finish what she had started. For her, returning to Hogwarts wasn't just about completing her education. It was a way to honor the memory of Fred and all those who had fallen in the battle. Neville, too, had found his place in the aftermath of the battle. He had shown incredible bravery during the war, leading Dumbledore's army and playing a pivotal role in the final fight. Yet, Neville wasn't content with simply resting on his laurels. He returned to Hogwarts to finish his education, and in doing so, he proved that bravery wasn't just about fighting battles, but about persevering through the hardest of times. Neville's return was a quiet yet powerful statement about the importance of education and the value of resilience in the face of adversity. For many students, particularly those from Hufflepuff, returning to Hogwarts after the war was also about finding a sense of belonging. Hufflepuff students had always been known for their loyalty, hard work, and determination. These values were essential in the aftermath of the battle, as many students sought to rebuild not just their school, but their lives. The idea of returning to Hogwarts wasn't just about completing their studies, it was about forging a sense of community and supporting one another as they healed from the trauma they had experienced. Hogwarts, though scarred by the war, remained a symbol of hope and continuity for many. The school's reopening was an important moment, a signal that life could return to normal even after such unimaginable devastation. Professor McGonagall, who had become headmistress after the battle, worked tirelessly to ensure that the students who returned to Hogwarts would find not only a place to learn, but also a place to heal. The staff at Hogwarts, many of whom had been affected by the war themselves, understood the importance of creating a safe space for the students. They worked to foster an environment that encouraged healing and growth, and their efforts were integral in the decision for many students to return. As for the specific subjects and exams, the returning students were not given special treatment. They still had to complete the necessary coursework and take the exams required to finish their education. However, many of the students, including Hermione, had already been ahead in their studies and needed little additional instruction. The teachers at Hogwarts worked with the students who had returned to ensure that they could catch up on what they had missed during the year that was interrupted by the war. For some students, this was an opportunity to make up for lost time, while for others, it was a chance to prove their worth and their abilities. While not all students returned to Hogwarts, the decision to finish their education was significant for those who did. It marked the end of an era of uncertainty and fear, and the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The fact that students like Hermione, Neville, Ginny, and others returned to Hogwarts to complete their studies was a testament to their resilience and their desire to rebuild. They had been through so much, and yet they understood the importance of continuing their education and contributing to the rebuilding of their world. For some it was a way to honor the fallen, while for others it was simply the next step in their journey to adulthood. Hogwarts, with its rich history and traditions, would forever hold a special place in the hearts of those who returned. The school had been a place of learning, friendship, and growth for so many students. And even though it had been marred by the horrors of the war, it remained a beacon of hope for those who had lived through it. The decision to return to Hogwarts was not just about finishing school. It was about reclaiming the future and rebuilding what had been lost. It was about the promise of a new beginning and the chance to start anew in a world that had been forever changed by the events of the past. Ultimately, the answer to the question of why some students returned to Hogwarts after the war was simple. For many, it was the only way forward. It was a way to heal, to grow, and to rebuild. It was a chance to complete their education and take their place in a world that was still recovering from the horrors of the war. And for characters like Hermione, Neville, Ginny, and others, returning to Hogwarts was a way to honor their past while moving toward their future. Hogwarts had always been a place of magic, but in the years following the battle it became something even more powerful, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the belief that life could continue even after the darkest of times.